Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. It's nothing serious. Wounds like this won't kill me, Xiaomi said, letting go and flashing a confident smile. Morgan lowered her gaze, thoughtful. Still, Gilgamesh's trump card is without a doubt beyond conventional standards. We only managed to counter it this time because Artoria unleashed the full power of her holy sword and used grand-scale magecraft. Exactly. Xiaomi stood and began to pace the room. That's why, next time, we'll need to coordinate with Saber and Ryder to launch an assault. Make sure Gilgamesh doesn't get the chance to even pull that noble phantasm out. No need to be that grim, Morgan said. There aren't many ways to block that noble phantasm head-on. But if I'm willing to sacrifice my spirit origin, I can create a window for my husband to win. Xiaomi froze. Do you really have to go that far? He wasn't afraid of death. He wasn't afraid of bleeding out in a fight against the King of Heroes. But hearing Morgan speak so casually about sacrificing herself, passing that burden to her, suddenly made Tenkai Xiaomi hesitate. If it had been Iskander or Artoria proposing this, he might have accepted it more readily. It's only one of many possibilities, Morgan said, giving her blue kimono sleeve a graceful shake. Her voice was calm and refined. As distasteful as it is, there are alternatives. But when the time comes, my husband will need to put that silver tongue of his to work. Convince someone to part with a treasure they paid dearly to obtain. Xiaomi immediately understood what she meant. That thing can heal wounds as severe as a lost heart in an instant, sure. But are you saying it can also defend against Gilgamesh's noble phantasm? Don't you trust your wife's judgment? Morgan asked. If it's the judgment of the Grand Magus Morgan, of course I trust it. He muttered. Still, deep down, Xiaomi couldn't help but admit. He was no match for this witch. Chapter 78, The Final War Council. The Xiaomi family's dining table had never been this lively. The long table was packed with guests, catching Sakura and Karin. Used to the usual quiet routine. Completely off guard. They sat on either side of the table, closest to Xiaomi and Morgan. From there, the table extended out with Waver and Iskander on one side, and Ire and Artoria on the other. Though the sudden influx of guests had stirred the girls' curiosity, the real reason behind the gathering was simple. This was the final meal before nightfall, before stepping onto the battlefield for the last time. Sensitive to the tension in the air, both Sakura and Karin kept quiet, picking up on the unspoken weight of the moment. Iskander, as always, remained unbothered. Casually eating and cracking light-hearted jokes to entertain the girls, easing the mood across the room. Miyasa, having only recently regained consciousness, was resting at the base, and Kiritsugu Emiya didn't show up at all. According to Ira, he was out in the city, conducting further investigations and making various preparations. He had handed all matters concerning the Holy Grail War over to her, even transferring the command spells into her care. Apparently, the impact of the Garden of Lost Will had been more profound on that freelance magus than anyone had expected. Mana supply to servants, however, still came from Kiritsugu. Morgan had casually offered guidance to help the couple form a shared contract. What no one realized was that Kenneth had spent quite a bit of time untangling and rewriting the details of the Grail War contracts to achieve something similar. Xiaomi, who didn't know Kiritsugu well, had no intention of probing further. Like Waver, he simply accepted the arrangement as an allied master. After dinner, Sakura and Karin quietly headed off to their rooms to play and rest. The remaining group gathered in the living room to hold their final strategy meeting and share details about their respective servants' noble phantasms. With the ritual site now confirmed to be Rita Temple, the remaining questions were how to launch their assault. And what came next? On that note, didn't you guys fight that gold glitter earlier and force him to use his trump card? Iskander asked, eyes on the map spread across the coffee table, with Rita Temple clearly marked. What kind of level are we talking about? Xiaomi leaned against the armrest. Completely off the charts. Beyond any standard classification. If it weren't for Xiaomi's magecraft shielding me, I would have been far more seriously hurt, Artoria admitted reluctantly. Facing Archer's ultimate noble phantasm head-on is probably not a viable plan. Iskander scratched at his beard. He hadn't witnessed the actual clash between the King of Knights and the King of Heroes, but from the aftermath, he could tell that it was a noble phantasm unleashed with its true name, and had a massive area of effect. It was a completely different kind of weapon from his own, unrevealed ultimate noble phantasm. No direct comparison could be made. Just because we can't face it head-on doesn't mean we're without defenses, Shiomi said, turning to Artoria and Ire. They understood immediately. Actually, I had planned to return this noble phantasm to Saber, Ire said, pressing her hand to her chest, her voice sincere. But I didn't expect you'd run into Archer at the church. The decision over the disposition of Avalon, the ever-distant utopia, the conceptual weapon, had always been hers. Garrett Sugu was now fully focused on ending the Holy Grail War and preparing to bring Ilya home once it was over. Compared to a millennia-old wish, Ire's heart had already shifted, leaning toward the daughter who mattered most in the reality they now faced. But in that case, Ire's Veil, your body. Artoria looked concerned. She knew full well that noble phantasm originally belonged to her. After all, she had only survived the loss of her heart thanks to the King of Knights' noble phantasm. Even now, it was the presence of that noble phantasm inside her that kept her body stable. No need to worry, Morgan said, offering a mage's perspective. Without the functions of the Lesser Grail, she's just an ordinary homunculus now. Normally, Morgan didn't care about anyone's life or death unless it involved Shiomi. But Denkai Shiomi was the kind of person who could kill without hesitation, yet would agonize over saving someone. If the trouble wasn't right in front of him, he didn't care. But once it was, he had to intervene. It left Morgan exasperated, but not unwilling. So, before dinner that afternoon, she conducted a brief assessment of Iris Veil's condition. I understand, Artoria nodded. Shiomi turned his face slightly, a thoughtful expression settling over him. Setting aside how well this noble phantasm can defend, I think there's something we need to clarify first. What is it? Waver asked, confused. He had just started to feel reassured after hearing about a possible countermeasure, and now Shiomi's words had unsettled him again. Archer is probably extremely proud of that noble phantasm. Shiomi said. I doubt he believes there's anything that can block or match it. So, if possible, I think we need a dual-layer strategy. Iskander looked at Shiomi with a nod of approval. You mean we should try to secure victory before the King of Heroes has a chance to use that weapon? And if he does, make sure we force a win in that single moment? Exactly. Shiomi nodded again. Everyone present agreed with the plan. The trump card had to remain hidden for as long as possible. But once they used it, it had to end the fight. If Gilgamesh realized they had a way to counter him, he would undoubtedly start looking for other ways to disrupt and sabotage them. Then when the time comes, Saber, Ryder, and I will attack from the front and take on the King of Heroes, Shiomi said, pointing at Rita Temple on the map. Morgan, Miss Iris Veil, and Waver will head to the activation point of the Greater Grail. Morgan nodded quietly, and once again, the others were caught off guard. Why not just bring Morgan with us? You could handle Kairiko Tomine just as well, Artoria asked. In terms of magecraft, no one here can match Morgan, Shiomi said firmly. And I have no idea what's needed to purify the Grail or bring the ceremony to an end. That's why Morgan needs to focus completely on handling the ritual. My husband has spoken. Let's all follow his plan, Morgan said with a knowing smile. Realizing that Shiomi and Morgan were already aligned on this, no one could come up with a better alternative. They had little choice but to go along. After all, Tenkai Shiomi's combat strength was also one of their most crucial trump cards. Chapter 79, Command Seals. After the strategy meeting concluded, everyone dispersed. Shiomi gave the guests free rein to move about the mansion and make their final preparations. He returned to his room alone and changed into something more suited for battle. Hard to believe the Holy Grail War is coming to an end like this, Morgan said, seated neatly at the edge of the bed. Shiomi no longer questioned the appropriateness of her barging in while he was changing. He'd long since given up on that. Where did things go wrong, I wonder? Shiomi sighed. Just like the 3 previous wars, it all ends in failure. Maybe this so-called wish-granting really is beyond what humanity can handle. Morgan shook her head. That's hard to say. But with the war nearing its end, you've still never told me what your wish is. You haven't, either. Because mine's already come true, I'd rather not say it, Morgan replied calmly. Then I'm about the same. Since it's a lost cause either way, I'd rather not speak it aloud and make it feel more real, Shiomi said, zipping up his outfit and turning to face her. Morgan raised a brow slightly. If I had to answer, I suppose it's not all that complicated. I just wanted to obtain the ritual framework of the third magic, to study and understand its mechanics. The materialization of the soul. Shiomi looked surprised, but didn't press further. For a magus, seeking something on the level of true magic wasn't unusual. And Morgan's strength was far beyond that of any modern magus. If anyone could decode and replicate the third magic, it would be her. You're not curious? I don't ask what I don't need to know. That's how I operate, Shiomi said with a bright smile. It doesn't affect my trust in you. And you can trust me, too. I'd never betray you for the sake of the Holy Grail. Morgan let out a quiet sigh. I already know. She understood that better than anyone. As for me, I don't really have a wish, Shiomi admitted with a faint smile. I hope that's not too disappointing. Morgan nodded. He had been thrust onto this battlefield, left to figure it all out on his own. Whatever lay beyond that, Morgan wouldn't force him to say. Not now. Also. Shiomi stepped closer, sat beside her, and gently took her hand. Morgan looked at him, visibly surprised. I didn't really know how else to use the command spells, so I never used them. In fact, I have one extra, Shiomi said as a red glow began to shimmer from his hand. But command spells are valuable sources of mana. If you're the one using them, I know they'll be put to better use. As he finished, the room was bathed in a soft red light before returning to normal. The 4 command spells had transferred from his hand to Morgan's pale, almost translucent one. 2 hand command spells over to a servant. My husband really is a magus who breaks all the rules, Morgan said, raising her eyes to meet his. Trust your wife. She won't let you down. The atmosphere had taken a strange, intimate turn after his gesture, and Shiomi, suddenly flustered, hurried to change the subject. I'll go check if Sakura and Karin are asleep. Once they're out, we can head out, Shiomi said, getting up a little stiffly and making his way out of the room. Morgan didn't stop him. She simply watched as he disappeared beyond the door, then gently touched the command spell on her hand. As if stroking something far more precious than the spell itself. After collecting herself, Morgan left the room too, taking a slow walk through the Shiomi residence, almost as if she were going on a leisurely stroll. Though it had only been a few days, it felt like she'd lived here for over a decade. Now, with the Holy Grail War nearing its end, the famed witch would have to say goodbye to it all and return to where she belonged. So she wanted to commit every detail of this moment to memory. As she passed the corridor overlooking the garden, she spotted Artoria standing among the flowers, bathed in moonlight. What are you looking at, Artoria? Maybe because it might be their last conversation, Morgan took the initiative to speak. Nothing much. Just the sky, Artoria replied, turning around and walking a few steps toward her. Even if the era and the country are different, the sky still looks the same. Even the moonlight shining on you is from the same moon, Morgan said with a poetic lilt. That's true. Artoria nodded, then gave Morgan a gentle smile. I nearly forgot. I should thank you, Morgan. I don't recall doing anything deserving of thanks, Morgan replied. But it's because you tried to force my heart to submit that I realized something I had been overlooking, Artoria said, turning her gaze back to the starry sky. I wanted to save Britannia, to undo its destruction. But I forgot that the world is more than just Britannia. It's not too late, Morgan said softly. If my wish were granted, maybe the people of Britannia would have a sky like tonight's forever. But the rest of humanity would suffer disaster, Artoria said with a bitter smile. If that's the price, then it's too high. Morgan studied her. The way you talk. It doesn't sound like you think the wish was wrong. Just that you've chosen to give it up. It's not giving up. It's choosing to protect something broader. The world of all humanity, Artoria said, eyes downcast. There's still regret, and things I can't quite let go of. But I'll let that wish remain a wish. Just a wish. I see. Then follow your heart. Morgan added with a faint smirk, if you ever reach Avalon and meet the magus I locked away there, be sure to rub this outcome in his face. After all, that incubus is probably watching all of this right now with those eyes of his that see through the present. And still chooses to do nothing. Unusually, Artoria and Morgan saw eye to eye. Yeah, I plan to. Then, as if something occurred to her, Artoria added, also, you're not the Morgan I once knew. Are you? Does that matter? Morgan answered, neither confirming nor denying. You're right. It doesn't. Artoria let out a long sigh. This Holy Grail War. It's been more unbelievable than I ever imagined. For both masters and servants alike. The night continued to flow in silence. And with it, the final moment. The march to the battlefield. Drew ever closer. Chapter 80, Ritu Temple at midnight. As the clock struck 1, the group split into 3 teams, approaching Ritu Temple from different routes. Iskander took the ox cart with Waver. Artoria rode her motorcycle, with Ira seated behind her. Xiaomi used his specialty, teleportation magecraft, to bring Morgan with him, arriving ahead of the others at the roadside just outside Ritu Temple to scout the area. This mana reeks. It's so foul, it's nauseating, Morgan said, raising a hand to half cover her mouth and nose, her expression twisted in distaste. The mana radiating from Ritu Temple didn't actually have a smell. Morgan was speaking from the perspective of magical quality and nature. The air was thick with moisture, clinging to the skin like a damp film. It pulsed with an unnatural vitality, almost like the entire mountain was alive. Breathing. It's turned completely into a visceral core, drawing in mana and preparing to devour the souls of servants to complete the Holy Grail, Morgan observed. Xiaomi clicked his tongue. Raising one hand, he released a pale violet butterfly made of mana. It fluttered up the stone steps, and halfway up, it burst in a flash of light that swept across the slope of Ritu Temple. Fairy fire. A detection spell Xiaomi had specifically developed to counter Assassin's presence concealment. It wasn't certain how effective it would be, but one thing was guaranteed. Once it activated, any enemy exposed by it would be unable to hide again, no matter how they cloaked their form or presence. Assassins not stationed at the gate, Morgan concluded after a moment. He must be deployed somewhere else. It hadn't taken long to reach Ritu Temple from the Xiaomi residence. Soon after, Artoria and Iskander arrived as well, each accompanied by their respective masters. It was clear from their condition that none of them had encountered resistance on the way. After regrouping and confirming the situation, they began ascending the temple steps together. With Gilgamesh's location still unknown, they moved cautiously, alert to every possibility. Just then, a dark figure emerged from the shadows and approached slowly. Garrett Suguamiya had come too. Unwilling to let his wife face the battlefield alone, he'd decided to accompany her. No one objected. They arranged into a formation. Servants in the lead, Xiaomi in the rear. And climbed the long staircase toward the mountain gate. At the top, they found the entire Ritu Temple bathed in an eerie red glow. Red phosphorescence floated on the breeze, giving the temple a strangely vivid, yet ominous radiance in the dead of night. From behind the buildings, thick, dark colors seeped out like viscous sludge. "You've arrived." "I've been waiting," came a voice. On the rooftop stood a lone figure in gleaming golden armor. Gilgamesh. Unlike earlier in the day, he no longer wore an air of playful indulgence. He was clearly prepared to face multiple servants at once. "Archer, did you and Kairiko Tomine force the Grail to activate?" Iria demanded, eyes locked on him. Gilgamesh gave a dismissive snort. "Isn't it obvious, doll? I don't care about the Grail. Kairi said to start it, so I did. Tokyomi turned out to be surprisingly useful. I figured he was just some worthless failure, but he made a decent vessel. With just the souls of 2 servants, he managed to jumpstart the Holy Grail. Tokyomi." Xiaomi's pupils narrowed sharply. As Ira had suspected, once the core was removed, it couldn't remain stable for even a day without a vessel. One was necessary to sustain it. The Innsburn homunculi were designed to meet the requirements of a proper lesser grail. But if the goal was only to unleash the stored magical energy, then any magus, or even an ordinary person with a trace of magecraft lineage, could suffice as a substitute vessel. "You're an old acquaintance of Tokyomi, aren't you? Seems fitting you'd be the one to send him off." "Xiaomi, was it?" Gilgamesh cast a dismissive glance at him. "Get lost, mongrels. My business is with the servants and this man only." Morgan chuckled softly. "Looks like your tactic didn't quite work out, my husband." "Hard to say," Xiaomi replied, gripping his left hand tightly. Where a single unused command spell still remained. He hadn't given this one to Morgan. It was a reward from the Holy Church, kept precisely for a moment like this. "Let's go, Ira." Garrett Sugu, having already guessed Xiaomi's plan, immediately grabbed Ira's Elon bolted toward the rear courtyard. Iskander gave Waver a firm pat on the back. "Go on, kid. We've got this covered." Waver stumbled forward a few steps. Clutching his own hand, where 4 command spells burned, he finally made his decision. "By the command spell. I order you, Rider, to claim victory." "By the command spell again. I forbid you to die in battle, Rider." "A 3rd time. I order you to fulfill your ambition, no retreat." And with the final command spell, "Wipe out every enemy in your path." It looked like reckless desperation, handing over all 4 spells at once. But everyone could feel it. The surge of mana from those 4 command spells had pushed Iskander's presence to its absolute peak. "I'm leaving this to you, Rider," Waver said, drawing a deep breath, eyes full of determination. The King of Conquerors laughed heartily as he drew his sword. "Since my master has gone this far, then I'll take the vanguard. At the very least. Bear witness to my noble phantasm before you go." As his voice rang out, a searing, dry wind swept across the entire Ritu Temple. He was activating his ultimate noble phantasm, dragging everyone into a new battlefield. This wind, unnatural and overwhelming, began to peel away reality itself. The sun scorched the earth. The horizon stretched far and wide, hidden behind raging sandstorms. Above it, a flawless blue sky. A reality marble, the forbidden great sorcery that rewrites the world. Of course, Iskander hadn't created this alone. The army now advancing behind them. Heroes who had once charged into countless battles at his side were part of it. This was the crystallized will of them all, brought into existence. That should take care of it, Shiomi murmured. The King of Conquerors had told him beforehand. This was one of his hidden noble phantasms, a reality marble. So, I offer this command spell to my wife. Shiomi took advantage of the chaos, using his last command spell. Go to your battlefield. Understood. I won't go easy on them. Morgan vanished without resistance, following the magic's call. A shame the kid on my side can't teleport like that, Iskander said with a grin. Shiomi summoned his red spear and stepped forward to the front line. A battlefield's a battlefield. It doesn't matter which one Weber chooses. With a spin of the weapon, the tip of his spear leveled toward Gilgamesh across the blazing sands. Chapter 81, Fierce Battle in this Holy Grail War. Ryder had only managed to display one noble phantasm. Gordius Wheel. It wasn't until a few hours ago, during the strategy meeting, that he revealed his second noble phantasm out of necessity, Ionia Hetairo. The fact that this noble phantasm, normally a powerful bounded field type spell wielded by Magi, was possessed by a Rider-class servant left everyone surprised. But now, having witnessed it with their own eyes, they finally understood. These radiant elite cavalrymen, bound by their loyalty to the King of Conquerors, Iskander, had transcended the boundaries of life and death, becoming eternal warriors. Wherever the battlefield lay, if their king once more sought to assert his ancient might, his vassals would rush to his side without hesitation, no matter the distance. Watching the grand, surging charge of the army advancing toward them, Artoria furrowed her brow deeply. Then, with a trace of frustration, she closed her eyes, unwilling to watch any longer. Don't let it get to you, King of Knights, Shiomi said, his back to the King of Conquerors and his army. There is more than one way for a king to stand. I once served beside the queen who watched over the dead and ruled the land of spirits. She bore an eternal burden alone. Isn't it the same for you? The holy sword you carry is the very proof of your kingship, isn't it? Artoria turned to look at Tenkai Shiomi, the one who had offered her those encouraging words. He met her gaze with a smile. Or has your sister already surpassed you in kingly presence and grace? Absolutely not. Artoria's hesitation lasted only a moment. True, she had not forged bonds with the Knights of the Round Table that transcended life and death like the King of Conquerors had with his men. But the holy sword entrusted to her was the source of her radiance as king. Watching their exchange, Iskander couldn't help but grin. He reached out, lifted Waver off the ground, and placed him in the chariot alongside him. But I only have one horse. Shiomi, Saber. Do the two of you want to ride together? Even with battle looming, the King of Conquerors couldn't resist teasing his companions to ease the tension. No need. Shiomi gave a casual wave, gently lifting off the ground. I have flight magic. I don't need to mount. Artoria nodded firmly in agreement. As the King of Conquerors' black steed galloped toward her, not even fully stopped, she deftly mounted it in a single motion. A fine horse, King of Conquerors, she complimented. Iskander wiped the underside of his nose with a smug grin. Hey. If it weren't for the situation, I'd be riding Bucephalus into battle myself. With the jest made, Iskander drew the sword from his waist and raised it high. Our foe is the invincible king of heroes. The perfect adversary. He roared, leading his vast army. But there's no need to fear. Warriors. We have the famed king of knights and mighty heroes of the age on our side. Now. Let's show the ancient heroic spirits our might. Oh. The assembled troops thundered in unison at their king's battle cry, their voices shaking the battlefield. Yet Gilgamesh, standing alone, remained unmoved by the clamor. He stared calmly at the formidable army before him. With a cold smile, he raised his chin slightly, gazing out toward the oncoming forces. As if answering that defiance, Shiomi hurled his spear forward with all his strength, launching it like an arrow loosed from a bowstring. I'll go first. Unlike the levitation or light body spells used by ordinary magi, this was true flight. Faster than a falcon, more agile than a hummingbird. In an instant, the distance created by the reality marble shrank from dozens of meters to just a few breaths. In response to this fearless assault, the space behind Gilgamesh erupted open. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of vault doors swinging wide as an avalanche of strange and varied noble phantasms poured forth like a storm, all aimed at Shiomi. But Shiomi was faster than ever today. He had already memorized the firing speed of those noble phantasms. As long as he moved faster than them, he could break through the deadly barrage. Like a swift swallow, Xiaomi twirled his spear, deflecting the weapons that came dangerously close to his body. He slipped through the dense rain of projectiles at a speed beyond comprehension, cloaked in the dust stirred up by countless explosions. Humphrey. With a cold sneer from Gilgamesh, the unscathed Xiaomi had already closed the distance, his crimson spear thrusting straight at the King of Heroes' throat. But a sudden surge of danger forced Xiaomi to backflip away. More noble phantasms abruptly rained down at high speed, flooding the area and leaving him with almost no space to maneuver. What shocked Xiaomi even more was that Gilgamesh, also within the blast radius, began slowly rising off the ground, floating into the sky. Unlike the battle at the Mayan River, Gilgamesh wasn't seated on the golden and emerald flying ship. He simply levitated, rising dozens of meters into the air. Clearly another ability granted by one of his countless noble phantasms. Well done. Seems it wasn't a waste of my time spending this era alongside that Kyrai. Though Gilgamesh's figure drifted higher, his voice still rang out clearly. If you seek to save the world, then surpass this battlefield. Endure the greatest trial I will bestow upon you. Artoria and Iskander, who had followed close behind on horseback, were also stunned by the sudden development. As they charged forward, they swung their weapons to deflect the incoming barrage of noble phantasms, unable to spare a glance skyward. Countless golden motes spread out against the azure backdrop, unfolding into a reality marble that spanned the heavens. No stars should ever shine during daylight. Yet here, they did. It was the gate of Babylon. There was no point counting anymore. A single glance revealed there were already hundreds. Perhaps thousands. This was the trial Gilgamesh had spoken of. Xiaomi furrowed his brow. Gilgamesh wasn't underestimating them as he'd hoped. On the contrary, he was taking this encounter seriously, treating it as a true contest. He didn't understand Gilgamesh's cryptic words, but there was no time to dwell on them. In battle, hesitation only leads to death. Lowering his stance, Xiaomi pushed his magic circuits to their limit. It was impossible to say how long Iskander's army could hold out. That army, once victorious across all lands, was now focused solely on fending off the relentless downpour of noble phantasms. King of Knights. Be ready to unleash your noble phantasm at any moment. I'll keep Gilgamesh occupied. Shouting his tactical directive, Xiaomi vanished with a sharp gust, leaving behind only a swirling vortex that scattered the dust and debris, revealing a barren patch of sand. Chapter 82, Curse in the Backyard of Rita Temple. There was once a pond so clear you could see the bottom. It was said that a dragon god had once dwelled here. But that was long ago. What now lay before Garrett Suguamiya and Irisveil was a lake of tar, a grotesque mix of red phosphorescence and black sludge. At its center loomed a monstrous mass, like a mountain of rotting flesh. Utterly repulsive. What is that? Garrett Sugu was visibly shaken by the sight. Irisveil's heart clenched painfully. Brow furrowed, she looked up at the gaping hole in the sky. From that void, black matter spilled forth, on the verge of flooding out. The Holy Grail really has been corrupted. Though she had trusted Morgan and Xiaomi's words, some truths had to be seen to be fully believed. We have to stop the Holy Grail from activating. If this keeps going, it'll be a catastrophe. She urgently warned her husband. This was no longer a colorless machine for granting wishes. It was a weapon, ready to become a tool for slaughter at any moment. Even without the ability to resonate with the Holy Grail, Irisveil could feel the overwhelming, sinister mana radiating from it. You're just in time, Garrett Suguamiya. Kairiko Tamin stood at the lake's edge, back turned to them. It's only fitting that you witness the completion of my Holy Grail. He wore a strange smile, eyes brimming with scorn for Garrett Sugu. As Morgan and Xiaomi had discussed in the castle the previous night, Kairai had not been trapped in the Garden of Lost Will. He had escaped by unconventional means. And seen the dreams of others in the process. Before the illusion vanished, he had glimpsed Garrett Suguamiya's dream. A cycle of abandonment. Garrett Sugu's life could be summarized in a single phrase. Relentless sacrifice. That man had given up countless moments of joy and happiness. To Kairai, even the tiniest sliver of such moments was worth cherishing. Worth dying for. But for someone like him, who couldn't even grasp a single fragment, Garrett Sugu's existence had long surpassed notions like hope or longing. Yet this very man had nearly been crushed by the weight of everything he'd forsaken, his heart worn down to its last fibers. It was laughably dull. Garrett Suguamiya's emptiness was nothing more than the byproduct of a wish that tried to exceed human limits. So Kairai no longer questioned himself. He knew what he had to do. By killing his wife with his own hands, he had come to understand and embrace his true nature. If the Holy Grail truly contained all the world's evil, then he would release it. Just to ask why it had chosen him as its master. He couldn't care less about the wails and cries that would follow the Grail's completion. He would savor it all. Stop the Holy Grail right now, Kyrai Kotamin. Garrett Sugu raised his rifle and aimed at the man with unwavering intent to kill. But Kyrai remained unfazed. With all the servants tied up by Archer, you're no match for me. Before he finished speaking, Garrett Sugu pulled the trigger. The bullets were all intercepted. From the shadows emerged assassins, their movements eerie and unnatural. Their bodies twisted grotesquely, as if under someone else's control, wrapped in a strange, sickly hue. You fed them that stuff, didn't you? Iris Veal gasped, covering her mouth in horror. The stench radiating from the assassins matched the vile, monosaturated water of the lake. They were too weak, scattered and fragile. So I gave them something to strengthen them, Kyrai said, lifting his empty left hand. But getting them to drink it willingly without being consumed took every one of my command spells. Even so, the assassins had no will of their own anymore. Stripped of consciousness, they had become Kyrai's most efficient killing machines. Iris, get back. I'll handle this. Cold sweat dripped down Garrett Sugu's face. Mia was nearby, ready to snipe from a hidden position. But with the assassins guarding him, there was no conventional way to kill Kyrai Kotamin. Garrett Sugu, Iris Veal had just opened her mouth to insist on fighting with him when a piercing noise cut through the air behind them. Garrett Sugu spun around in alarm, reaching for Iris Veal, but before the black dagger could strike, it was deflected by a sudden burst of light. Without a servant, you'd have no way to stop him. A calm, regal voice rang out as Morgan descended beside the Emiya couple. Morgan. Iris Veal's face lit up with relief. By all rights, the servants should have been blocked. But it must have been Shiomi, using a command spell amidst the chaos, who got her through. Oh? I didn't expect Gilgamesh to let you slip by, Kyrai said without a hint of concern. But if you still think assassin is what he used to be, you'll be in trouble. Which who never existed in human history. The title made Morgan narrow her eyes. And then, boom. A deafening roar erupted from the lake. Black and crimson filth began pouring from the hole in the sky. It was the manifestation of the Holy Grail's corrupted mana. Not enough yet to grant a wish, but more than enough to devour anything it touched. With a casual wave of his hand, Kyrai summoned the assassins. They emerged with distorted howls and charged at the three now surrounded. Hold the line. I'll handle the servants. Morgan swept her hand, casting defensive and reinforcement magecraft on Garrett Sugu and Iris Veal. She could have just focused on surviving and completing her task. But almost reflexively, she gave them protection. She really couldn't cast off that innate softness. Morgan sighed inwardly, then slashed down the first assassin to approach with her magic sphere. The fallen assassin didn't vanish. His body crumpled, dissolving into a thick black sludge that slowly crept toward them. Watch out. That black mud can contaminate a servant's spirit core. Even a trace can be dangerous. Iris Veal called out urgently. Morgan stomped the ground lightly, and the earth beneath them rose, forming a small elevated platform. Then let's adjust the numbers a little. She raised her hand, light blooming in her palm before scattering and exploding around them. When the dazzling light faded, 5 identical clones of Morgan hovered in the air. Seeing this, Kyrai Kotamin instinctively pulled out his reserve black keys, ready for a fight. Just a little more time. Chapter 83, United Counterattack in the Boundless Desert. Denkai Shiomi was nowhere to be seen. Gilgamesh raised an eyebrow, sensing the change. Slowly, he lifted his gaze to the sky above. Far overhead, many times higher than his own position, Shiomi was adjusting his stance midair, preparing to dive. Harnessing the acceleration of gravity to increase his speed, he aimed to rush straight toward Gilgamesh for a decapitating strike. Within the reality marble of the King of Conquerors, not a single cloud marred the sky. Compared to the vast desert below, the sky offered no place to hide, making it all the easier for Gilgamesh to lock onto his target. Buffeted by the fierce winds at high altitude, Shiomi flipped his body and plunged downward toward Gilgamesh at breakneck speed. Fool. Gilgamesh redirected a section of the gates of Babylon to target Shiomi. Perhaps due to focusing too much on Shiomi, the number of noble phantasms he had been unleashing against the Ionia Hetairo had dropped significantly. Artoria, having gradually adapted to the pressure and now watching for a counterattack opportunity, immediately prepared to release the bounded field that cloaked her holy sword. Using the violent winds compressed within her blade, she could launch herself into the air and reach Gilgamesh's position, joining Shiomi in a pincer assault on a king of heroes. As long as they kept up the pressure, the Golden King wouldn't have time to ready the Sword of Rupture. Timing it perfectly, Artoria leapt from her warhorse, skidded to a halt on the desert sands, and instantly unleashed invisible air. With a thunderous blast, she shot toward Gilgamesh like a hammer. Every noble phantasm in her path was knocked aside at a speed too fast for the eye to follow. Kid. Hold on tight. Not willing to be outdone, Iskander snapped the reins, preparing to launch his ox cart into the sky. All soldiers, maintain formation and ready your ranged weapons. With his command, Iskander's gorgeous wheel surged upward on crackling violet lightning. Waver, still unaccustomed to the bull cart noble phantasm's charge, clung tightly. As the wind roared past, he saw a view he had never noticed before. The world was so vast, the sky so endless. And he, so small within it. I met the king, and only then did I understand the true scale of the world. Let's go, rider. Waver stretched out his arm, pointing at Gilgamesh as he shouted. Iskander grinned wide, flashing his white teeth, and laughed as he urged the cart faster. On the ground, the army watched this never-before-seen spectacle. Already stirred by gathering here beyond life and death, none had imagined witnessing such a surreal scene. Gilgamesh beamed with delight, opening over a dozen new portals beside him. The moment those gates appeared, Denkai Shiomi, the king of knights, and the king of conquerors all closed in simultaneously. 3 strikes shot toward Gilgamesh in unison. RRGH. Shiomi gritted his teeth, pouring in strength, but couldn't push forward any further. Weapons burst forth from the portals surrounding Gilgamesh, enclosing him in a protective sphere. Then, golden twin swords slid from the gates behind his shoulders and swung forward. Combined with the other exploding noble phantasms, they blasted all 3 attackers away. King of Knights. Iskander landed back on his ox cart, which had caught him. He reached out and pulled the nearest Artoria into the cart as well. But Shiomi was too far away. And just then, a flurry of noble phantasms rained down, cutting them off from each other. Don't worry. Shiomi twisted midair and suddenly came to a halt. That guy. Did he use magecraft to create a foothold? Waver instantly understood what Shiomi had done. Normally, without a stable point in the air, once an attack failed, it was nearly impossible to launch a second one. But Shiomi had used magecraft to initiate another assault. I'm going to. Artoria spun and leapt from the side of the ox cart, kicking off into the air again. Since the cart couldn't stay unpiloted for long, Iskander took control of his noble phantasm, guiding it through the air while focusing on dodging Gilgamesh's noble phantasms and preparing to recover the 2 fighters. From afar, countless noble phantasms were being batted aside as a battle beyond human limits unfolded in the sky. Suddenly, one of the noble phantasms struck by Artoria exploded violently. Though she relied on instinct to dodge, she couldn't maintain her aerial footing for more than a few seconds and began falling back. At this height, even if she hit the ground, the impact wouldn't be fatal. A razor-sharp sword flew toward her chest, ready to pierce through. When a hand suddenly reached out and grabbed her empty left hand. It was Shiomi. He too had momentarily withdrawn to avoid the blast. Reaching out swiftly, he pulled Artoria close and supported her back. I'll create a foothold. Use this chance to unleash your noble phantasm. Understood. As she felt her body lighten, Artoria stepped onto the invisible sky just like Shiomi, as a glowing magic circle formed beneath their feet. Now! Shiomi shouted. Artoria held her breath, focused completely, and the holy sword in her hands erupted with radiant brilliance. Let's end this. Excalibur. But Gilgamesh had anticipated this. He too opened the gate of Babylon and reached into its depths to draw his ultimate noble phantasm, ready to annihilate them all. Submit and perish. Immuna Elish. The radiance that split the heavens clashed with the fantasy born from the inner sea of the planet, right within the mental landscape of the king who once ruled an empire spanning 3 continents. The sword of rupture, once powerful enough to cleave the world itself, had its force checked by the noble phantasm of Artoria Pendragon. Their clash whipped up a storm that roared across the sky and earth, threatening to tear the mental world apart. But this stalemate couldn't last. The balance could collapse at any moment. They needed something more. Shiomi extended his arms. In the name of the paradise beyond the world. Bring peace to the king. Avalon, the ever-distant utopia. It was the barrier of the fairyland that rejected all outside corruption, sealing itself from the world. Only the innocent could enter the inner sea of the planet. Beneath the sheath of the holy sword, for an instant, all worldly laws were shut out. The greatest protection known to man. One of the ultimate defenses, unreachable even by the 5 true magics. Untouchable, unbreakable. You want me to use my noble phantasm? The battlefield changes by the second. In the worst case, I won't have the time to activate my second noble phantasm. But if it's you, you can handle the mana needed to invoke another's true name. Then I won't let you down. Chapter 84, Slaying the Demigod. Just as Artoria had said, Shiomi truly could withstand the burden of releasing Avalon, the ever-distant utopia. Gilgamesh hadn't anticipated this. He had no idea Artoria still concealed such a noble phantasm. The blow from the sword of rupture was not only entirely neutralized, but even reflected back. Its force combined with the brilliance of the holy sword, slicing toward Gilgamesh. With no time to dodge at such close range, Gilgamesh summoned the shield of the gods in defense. Don't even think about it. Returning the borrowed noble phantasm to Artoria, Shiomi leapt up from beside the King of Knights and gripped his summoned crimson spear once more. Then let's give you the ultimate test. The open gate of Babylon fired again. Now outside the range of the holy sword's protection, Shiomi became the focus of every weapon. But Gilgamesh wasn't the only one attacking. Iskander raised his hand and brought it down with a commanding sweep. The soldiers who had been standing by sprang into action, hurling their weapons with full force. They clashed with Gilgamesh's incoming noble phantasms, erupting in a series of explosions. Though their weapons didn't match the might of Gilgamesh's treasures, they were enough to disrupt his attack on Shiomi. Dodging the barrage of deadly projectiles, Shiomi surged toward the King of Heroes, aiming for the sky. Spotting a gap in the shield of the gods, he lunged forward with his crimson spear. But the strike that should have pierced Gilgamesh's vitals halted just a hair's breadth away. Chains shot from the gates of the vault, wrapping tightly around Tenkai Shiomi. Enkidu. The chains of heaven. Originally meant to restrain those with divinity, they still possessed overwhelming strength even when used as ordinary chains. Feel honored. You forced me to subdue with this noble phantasm, Gilgamesh said, raising the sword of rupture to finish the job. Don't jump to conclusions. Whoever said Magus has to fight alone? Shiomi grinned. His body suddenly dispersed. In the blink of an eye, 5 versions of Tenkai Shiomi appeared, surrounding Gilgamesh from different angles. What? You want to pick up a few spells from me? My husband really is insatiable. Isn't what you learned in the Land of Shadows enough? Even with Morgan's teasing, she didn't hesitate to teach Shiomi one of her most formidable spells. He kept it a secret. So much so that not even the strategy meeting had mentioned it. Following his will, the magic spear in Shiomi's hand transformed into various weapons. A bow and arrow, a longsword, a greatsword, a massive hammer. Together with his original form, 5 distinct attacks streaked across the air in rapid succession. Empowered by the primordial runes, they easily tore through Gilgamesh's golden armor. But the final magic spear stopped just short of piercing his chest plate. Gilgamesh let out a cold laugh. He moved to activate his noble phantasm again. But found himself completely frozen. The space around him had been sealed tight. Never rely on just one spear in battle. There will always be foes a single lance can't defeat. Pin them down with the first. Then skewer them with the second. I'll only show you once. If you don't learn it, you know the consequences. His master's voice still echoed in his mind. Soaring spear of piercing death. Gaibolg alternative. Summoning the second, hidden crimson spear, Shiomi unleashed its true name. The spirit core of the Golden King was struck clean through. Blood spilled from Gilgamesh's lips. So this is the god-slaying spear. That woman had no idea who she was teaching, Gilgamesh said flatly. His golden armor faded, blood still flowing as the tangible presence of the King of Heroes slowly began to dissolve. What are you talking about? Shiomi asked, puzzled. It's your victory. Take it with pride, Gilgamesh said, eyes fixed on Shiomi. Prepare yourself, God Slayer. Once you set foot on the path of salvation, there's no turning back. His words were full of implication, leaving Shiomi no choice but to press further. What do you mean by that? I owe you no explanation. Go ahead. Walk your path of no return. Ha ha ha. But Gilgamesh clearly had no intention of saying more. With that, his body faded rapidly, vanishing completely along with his noble phantasms. Though victorious, Shiomi could only descend with a storm of questions weighing on his heart. Gilgamesh's words had stirred something deep within him. Who was he, really? Where had he come from? What were the memories he had lost? And where should his path lead? Eyes closed, lost in thought, Shiomi let himself fall. Just begin your journey. Don't cling to this place. When the time is right, we'll meet again. Master and student. Let's agree to reunite then. Her parting words echoed in his mind. His master's final message before he left the Land of Shadows. Back then, overwhelmed with the bittersweet feeling of parting, he hadn't reflected deeply. Now, that moment returned with new weight. If this journey truly held a unique purpose. Shiomi. Artoria, who had already landed, noticed his unguarded fall and rushed to catch him, sensing something was wrong. Snapping back to awareness, Shiomi realized his oversight. He'd nearly put himself in danger. Sorry to trouble you, he said, signaling Artoria to let him down and regaining his footing. That was an incredible counterattack. Iskander rode up in his ox cart, The cheers of the still-standing soldiers behind him celebrating their hard-won and extraordinary victory. Not at all. It was only thanks to both of you that it all came together, Shiomi said, taking a deep breath to steady himself. The king of heroes who stood in our way is gone. Now, only one task remains, Artoria said, clenching her left hand. The long-lost sword sheath had returned to her, but she knew she'd never need to set foot on such a battlefield again. Perhaps that was why it had been lost to begin with. Perhaps even then, fate had tried to tell Artoria Pendragon to let go. She just hadn't noticed, brushing it off as a trivial setback. Then let us, as kings, witness the conclusion of this Holy Grail war, Iskander said. Though there were regrets, this expedition was satisfying. He raised a hand, and as the soldiers saluted, the reality marble slowly dissolved. Before them stood Ritu Temple, still glowing with an ominous phosphorescence. Yes. She's still waiting for me. Shiomi turned and began walking toward the rear of the temple. Chapter 85, Manifestation. Morgan descended slowly onto the earthen platform, rejoining Iris V. Elon Garetsugu Emiya. Her blue eyes swept calmly over the surroundings. All the assassins had been eliminated, dissolving into pools of black mud. Under the forced activation of the Greater Grail, that sludge gathered and began to encircle the platform where Morgan stood, like a creeping swamp. She glanced at the command spell on the back of her hand. Just moments ago, she had created 5 clones, and to make up for the mana consumption, had used one of the command spells. Normally, with Shiomi's mana supply and her own exceptional reserves, Morgan could easily sustain her spells and combat. But this time, she could feel Shiomi holding back slightly. She didn't need to ask. He must have pushed himself to the limit against Gilgamesh. Even so, as she watched her clones gradually dissipate, Morgan understood that maintaining them would now require consuming another command spell. The assassins were already gone. There was no point in wasting any more mana. The only surprise was how stubbornly the priest endured. Though Morgan had to avoid direct contact with the black mud and was nearly treated as a mana source by the forcibly awakened Greater Grail, giving Kairai the upper hand. He had only taken a few gunshots and lost the use of one arm to Garetsugu's bullets. He wasn't out of the fight yet. Just then, the hole in the sky erupted, pouring an even greater torrent of pitch-black matter into the lake at Ritu Temple. The lake, once clear, had turned murky. Steam rising from the surface signaled the water had almost reached boiling. Oh. Kairai glanced back at the gaping hole above, speaking with casual detachment. Looks like the king of heroes has fallen too. There was no bitterness or regret in his voice over a fallen comrade. Only cold acceptance. You probably don't know this, he said with a satisfied smile, but Archer's soul is more than 3 times the size of a typical servant's. With that much soul converted into mana, nothing can stop the Grail from activating now. Morgan raised an eyebrow and slowly lifted her hand. So what? It's just a sophisticated ritual. Each phase has its own countermeasure. But you won't live to see it. As magical energy coalesced in her hand, she prepared to strike Kairai down in a single blow. Then turn her attention to stabilizing the Greater Grail's anomaly. But behind her, Iris Ve'il suddenly gasped. Morgan froze, halting her spell. Whatever Iris Ve'il saw, Morgan saw too. A silver-haired woman in a black ceremonial gown was slowly emerging from the Greater Grail. Around her, grotesque flesh twisted and writhed, sprouting arms that waved eerily. Some as if trying to touch her, others as if worshipping her. That's the core of the Greater Grail. Kairai also turned, his gaze fixed on the figure. Garetsugu's voice trembled as he looked on from the platform. Iris. What is that? Justice Lizrich, Iris Ve'il whispered, staring in horror at the woman who shared her face. If that was the Grail's manifested form, there could only be one explanation. Justice Lizrich von Insburn. The former head of the Insburn family. She had sacrificed herself to set the Holy Grail war in motion, and though her body perished, her will remained within the Greater Grail. Iris Ve'il was a homunculus modeled after Justice, created by the Insburns to perfectly replicate her abilities and appearance. The massive magic circuit left behind in the Great Cave. It was all her doing, Morgan murmured, gazing at the figure in the black gown from afar. Justice's dark form floated gently forward and landed beside Kairai Kotamin. Only 4 servant souls to awaken me? Laughable. You call that a sacrifice? She sneered coldly, her voice dripping with malice. And you, a representative of the Holy Church. This is the best you can do? Kairai tried to respond. But his strength was suddenly gone. Staggering, he looked down. A pale, sinewy hand had sprouted from the lake and pierced through his back, clutching his heart without him even noticing. With a sharp pull, the hand withdrew, and Kairai collapsed backward like a severed kite string, tumbling into the mist-covered lake. Iris Ve'il covered her mouth, choking down the surge of nausea as she watched the hand, still holding his heart, slip back into the black mud. Kiriko Tamine. The enemy they had feared the most was ultimately slain by the very thing they had awakened. Fresh hearts taste divine. But it's not enough, not nearly enough. Justice grinned with madness, licking her lips as if she'd just savored the most exquisite delicacy. Her gaze locked hungrily onto Morgan. As a servant brought forth by the will of the Holy Grail, Morgan's very existence naturally stirred its craving. Devouring both servant and master still isn't enough. Now you want to consume me too? Morgan had no intention of dying quietly. She lifted off the platform again, rising high into the air. But being a servant came with a fatal disadvantage. If even a single touch landed, she would be forcibly absorbed, recycled as fuel for the Grail's activation. She needed to keep her distance, unleash destructive magecraft from afar. But almost immediately, Morgan realized she had made a critical miscalculation. This aberrant Greater Grail's manifested personality wasn't some simplistic, mindless evil. As if tearing through the barriers of time and space, Justice was suddenly right in front of her the moment she ascended. You smell delicious. Be a good girl and become my sacrifice. Justice extended her hand, reaching toward Morgan's chest. There was no time. Not to cast a spell, not to use a command spell for teleportation. No warning, no opening. As easily as one might stroll across a garden, Justice could reach anywhere. She was the ultimate predator, feasting without hesitation since her awakening. Seeking to fill the Grail with the 7 servant souls it demanded. But fate was not yet sealed. A crimson flash split the air between Morgan and Justice, severing Justice's arm. Black blood sprayed outward. In a blink. Less than a second. A familiar figure grabbed the witch by the shoulders, pulling her away from Justice at lightning speed. Chapter 86, and Morgan stared in shock at Tenkai Shiomi, his body battered and covered in wounds. This man had just finished a grueling battle, yet without even a moment to catch his breath, he had rushed straight to her side. Just like he always had in the past. Holding Morgan in his arms, he skidded several meters across the ground before finally coming to a stop, his eyes fixed on Justice floating in the sky. The runes triggered a violent explosion that engulfed Justice as well. Looks like it didn't work. Morgan watched as Justice slowly drifted away in the flames, landing atop the black mud. The burns from the blast were already beginning to fade from that body. But at least we've learned something, Shiomi said as he tightened his hold on Morgan, slightly crouching. As hands reached for him from the surrounding black mud, he leapt into the air, landing atop the tallest nearby tree. That kind of teleportation doesn't seem to be usable in quick succession. Narrowing his eyes, he locked his gaze onto Justice. Looks like it has a cool down. Morgan nodded. Then at the very least, can you put me down? I'm afraid not, Shiomi replied with a wry smile. That thing knows your worth. It'll do whatever it can to consume you. And I won't let that happen. At his words, Morgan looked over his shoulder and noticed the scorched holes in his clothes still faintly smoking, the skin beneath visibly burned. Clearly, he had used his body to shield her from the debris when Justice's hand was severed. Then you handle the movement and defense, and I'll take care of the offense. Morgan put away her magic spear and opened her palm. Thankfully, they weren't alone in facing Justice. Artoria and the other 2 had followed closely behind Shiomi and arrived on the scene. Irisveil warned the 2 servants not to touch the black mud by the lake. If they were tainted, even the few remaining would be at risk of being corrupted or controlled. No, if it only affects servants, then I'll lead the charge. Shiomi leapt again, evading Justice's clumsy attack, and landed beside Artoria and the others. Don't worry about us. Giritsugu and I are fine. Just focus on what you need to do. Irisveil called out, shielded by Giritsugu. He was likely ready to risk wading through the tainted mud below the platform to get Irisveil to safety if things got desperate. But that thing is clearly our natural enemy as servants, Iskander said, eager to help but aware that staying untainted was help enough. Shiomi gently set Morgan down and reached out his hand. The crimson spear that had severed Justice's arm flew back into his grasp. Then we just have to avoid touching this stuff on the ground. He traced a motion through the air. 18 rune symbols flashed as thick ice rapidly spread from beneath Shiomi's feet, freezing the entire area around Ritu Temple's lake. Even the surface, which had started to boil from the mana, was encased in ice. Even the Greater Grail's writhing paused momentarily. Don't let that thing touch you. One touch and it's over, Shiomi warned, casually, before adding, the ice is slippery, so be careful. With that, he shot forward like a cannonball. Don't get cocky. Justice, frustrated at being interrupted mid-meal, had no intention of backing down. You're not really Justice Liesrich, are you? Shiomi's spear was intercepted by a silver-haired familiar. You're the Black Holy Grail, aren't you? Behind him, Irisveil instantly recognized it as an Insburn magecraft. granting life to one's hair and transforming it into animals or weapons depending on the situation. But the scale was entirely different. Justice's familiar had turned into a sword, and each strike rivaled that of a servant. Ha! Justice. Or rather, the personality mimicked by the Black Holy Grail. Let out a cold, merciless laugh. Using the ice laid down by Shiomi as a base, she shattered it into fragments, turning them into countless ice blades that flew toward him. But before they could strike, Artoria and Iskander attacked from both flanks, dispersing the barrage. Their swords slashed into Justice's body, severing her arm and shoulder in one blow. Without so much as a flinch of pain, Justice staggered back. The ice beneath her cracked open, and from the fractures emerged a swarm of pale arms, grasping toward Iskander and Artoria. The two servants were forced to roll across the ice, narrowly escaping the reach of the grotesque limbs. As her severed arms began to regenerate, Justice raised her head. Morgan had already finished her magecraft and was charging straight toward her target. The resulting explosion sent a massive wave, nearly 10 meters high, crashing across the lake. Even the base of the Greater Grail, a writhing mass of decayed flesh, was nearly half destroyed. Shrouded in fog, Shiomi, who had momentarily eased his guard, suddenly realized something. Kiriko Tomine wasn't here. Had he been completely annihilated? Unfortunately, the situation didn't leave him time to question Morgan or the Emiya couple. Through the clearing smoke, he saw Justice slowly rising into the air near the now opened hole. Keep struggling, offerings. That way, I can savor you all the more, she sneered. As she spoke, a golden cup surfaced from her body, then vanished again. The mana around the hole surged rapidly. Is that a noble phantasm? Artoria asked, shocked. Shiomi was already preparing a grand magecraft. Most likely something akin to a noble phantasm. An offensive weapon. Given her overwhelming edge against servants, if it makes contact, it's over. Don't just stand there, Artoria. Prepare your noble phantasm. Morgan joined them, and the second command spell granted by Shiomi instantly vanished as a torrent of mana surged into her. Saber. Take the mana from the command spell. I entrust it to you. Iris Veil, seeing this, activated her own command spell to supply the mana Artoria needed. Understood. The mana of the King of Knights and the Witch swelled in an instant. Though lacking a comparable noble phantasm, Iskander raised his sword and summoned a storm of lightning to support them. A clash of ultimate techniques was about to erupt. Sing, O Black Grail, Song of Grail. With Justice's declaration, the servants unleashed their own noble phantasms. Sword of Promised Victory, Excalibur. The now unreachable Utopia, Roadless Camelot. The black mana of the Holy Grail clashed with the blinding brilliance of heroic spirits. Life Wall. Yet the curses could not pierce the servant's light. Shiomi, through his magecraft, blocked them all. Damn it. Just before she was consumed by the radiant surge, Justice roared in fury. Chapter 87, the final task. This is the underground cavern where the Greater Grail lies. In all his years in Fuyuki, this was the first time Tenkai Shiomi had truly set foot at the heart of the Greater Grail. With him were Morgan and the allies who had just fought by his side. The vast, open sky above and the barren earth below made it easy to forget this was all underground. The cavern stretched nearly 3 kilometers in diameter, and at the end of the path they walked stood a wall-like formation of rock. Atop that rock was the altar of the Greater Grail. The Black Holy Grail had been destroyed, and the mound of flesh above the lake behind Ritu Temple had vanished along with it. Tokyomi Tasaka, used as the core, had been retrieved from the lake by Garetsugu Emiya himself. Though he'd lost an arm, he was still clinging to life. What shocked Shiomi even more, though, was that Garetsugu, known for being cold and ruthless, had acted to save someone on his own initiative. Had he misjudged this man? Or had something within Garetsugu changed? Shiomi couldn't say. But as they drew within less than a kilometer of the altar, everyone felt it. The barrier blocking their advance. It was both a wall and a safeguard. Sealed within the Greater Grail's altar was an endless wellspring of magical energy. Limitless for any magus to draw from. Without the Holy Grail manifest as a medium, coming into contact with that much raw mana was dangerously reckless. This is close enough, Morgan said, stopping. The grotesque form that had manifested in the lake had only been the external terminal of the Greater Grail. Even if it and the whole had been destroyed, it wouldn't affect the core. It would merely shut the door once again. She turned and faced Artoria, Iskander, and their respective masters. Once the purification begins, the Holy Grail will lose the mana needed to function. The servants will begin to fade. So I'll ask one last time. Do you all agree to bring the Holy Grail war to an end? It seemed like an unnecessary question, but Morgan asked again to be sure. She understood all too well the allure the Grail held for both magi and heroic spirits. But after witnessing its true nature with their own eyes, none of them Neither master nor servant could accept a grail that had been corrupted. Their answer was unanimous. Then let us begin the purification ritual. Morgan raised her magic spear, using it as a staff. She gently thrust it into the air before her, as if triggering a hidden switch. Instantly, vast magic circuits flared to life across the ground. If one were to look from the sky, they'd see the circuit's design mirrored the form of Justice seen earlier. Because Justice, whose entire body was a web of magic circuits, had used her own flesh and blood to become the foundation of the Greater Grail, a key component of the Holy Grail War had been fulfilled. The contamination of the Greater Grail stemmed from an irregular class servant entering it during the Third Holy Grail War, tainting its mana. Under normal circumstances, purification was no longer feasible. Only dismantling it remained. But Morgan, who had deciphered the structure of the Fuiuki Grail War system in mere days, knew what had to be done. The price? Only a portion of the mana that took 60 years to fully accumulate. That sacrifice would be enough to purge all the world's evil sleeping within the Grail. As the purification ritual began, it became clear the time for farewells had come. The masters and their servants slowly dispersed, parting ways and offering their final words. "What's wrong? Feeling reluctant to let go?" Morgan asked. Now that the purification ritual of the Holy Grail had begun, there was no longer any need for her to maintain it. Unless, of course, Artoria or Iskander suddenly changed their minds and tried to interfere. That was the only reason she had the leisure to ask Shiomi. "No. It's just that so much has happened in the past few days," Shiomi said with a faint smile. "Chasing after an omnipotent wish-granting device really isn't easy." "The Magi didn't create the Holy Grail to free themselves from all suffering," Morgan replied, shaking her head. "They did it to overcome suffering itself. Whether it's reaching the root or chasing a dream so grand it defies the limits of the world. It was that very desire to change the world that brought about everything as it stood now. And it was that same desire that led the Holy Grail War to such a conclusion." "The servants are beginning to fade," Morgan said, pulling Shiomi back from his thoughts. Artoria and Iskander were waving their farewells in their own ways. Though Iris Veil seemed a little reluctant, she still smiled. Waver, on the other hand, was crying uncontrollably, forcing the King of Conquerors to pat him on the shoulder and offer a few parting words. After bidding farewell to their servants, Iris Veil and Waver left the cavern, leaving Morgan and Shiomi behind as they waited for the purification to conclude. "The ritual is just about finished," Morgan said gently. Shiomi looked at the witch beside him, a deep sense of reluctance rising in his chest. "The Holy Grail War may not have granted anyone else's wish. But yours, at least, came true," he said, forcing a smile as he congratulated her. "I suppose so," Morgan replied with a vague smile. As the ritual neared its end, the words he'd been holding back clung to the edge of his lips. Until the light signaling Morgan's departure began to shimmer. If I asked you to stay, to forge another contract with me, would you say yes?" Shiomi reached out and held the hand that was still within reach. Morgan looked slightly surprised, a flicker of joy lighting her eyes. "Without the Holy Grail War, maintaining a servant's mana will be difficult. Even for you. Even so, I want you to stay," Shiomi said, lowering his gaze. "I still don't know anything about you." Unexpected, yet not at all out of character. Very much in line with what Morgan had came to understand about him. "Well then, it can't be helped. Since my husband has pleaded so sincerely, how could I possibly turn a deaf ear?" Morgan turned her wrist and clasped Shiomi's outstretched hand. "Even if I know you're not asking just for yourself, I'll let that slide, just this once. I didn't mean it like..." Shiomi started, feeling misunderstood, ready to explain. But Morgan silenced him with a glance. "Less talking, more contracting," she said. "Let's get it done." "Right, then I'll..." Just as he was about to recite the spell, his lips were sealed. A cool, soft sensation filled his senses. Chapter 88, Epilogue 3 months later. Compared to the frigid winter during the Fourth Holy Grail War, spring in Fuiuki was pleasantly mild. Perfect for a stroll or a bit of leisure. "So, Kiriko Tomin's body is still missing?" In a quiet cafe, Iris Veil van Insburn sipped her coffee as she spoke to Tenkai Shiomi across the table. Waver Velvet was seated beside them. "Yes. Neither the Holy Church nor the Mages Association has found any trace of his body," Shiomi replied with a slight nod. "Based on what you told me, Kairai was definitely impaled through the heart by the Black Holy Grail and fell into the lake." Waver chimed in with a theory. "Could he have been swallowed by the Greater Grail? That thing looked like it could devour anything." "We can't rule it out, but it still leaves me uneasy," Shiomi said, taking a sip of his coffee. "I tried using items tied to Kairai to cast a tracking spell. Every result came back with the same conclusion. He's dead." Iris Veil let out a soft sigh. "If that's the case, She wanted to offer some words of comfort, but in the end, nothing felt quite right. Kiriko Tomine, who had once made Garrett Sugu so wary, being so quietly and unceremoniously killed by the very grail he helped awaken. It was far from a reassuring end. Forget it. Let's change the subject, Shiomi said, turning his gaze toward the cafe window. Outside, Garrett Sugu Emiya was standing with a silver-haired young girl, peering into a storefront display. Ilyas V. Ilvanensburn. Half a month after the Holy Grail War ended, Iris V. Ilhet came to Shiomi personally, asking him to help her husband travel to Germany and retrieve their daughter from the Insburn estate. Realistically, Garrett Sugu could have done it alone. But to be safe, they had hired Shiomi for support. No expense spared. Who's the boy? Shiomi asked. Beside Garrett Sugu stood a young red-haired boy. Oh, him? His name's Shiru, Iris V. Il explained. His parents died in a car accident last month, and he had no remaining relatives. He happened to get along with Garrett Sugu, so he took him in and gave him the Emiya name. Shiomi nodded, understanding. He didn't pry further. Having adopted 2 children himself, he had no reason to question another man's decision to do the same. Their meeting today over coffee was really just an exchange of information. An informal debriefing after the war. As the masters who had made it through the chaos, it was only natural they'd want to keep up with the aftermath. I heard the Tasaka girl's been studying with you lately. Iris V. Il asked. It's more of a temporary measure, Shiomi said, shaking his head. Tokiomi Tasaka had indeed survived. Barely. But having been forcibly used as the activation core for the Grail, his magic circuits were severely damaged. Though he could still perform magecraft, he could no longer be called a true magus. Only a magecraft practitioner. Already less gifted than his daughter Rin to begin with, Tokiomi now found himself completely unable to instruct her in advanced magic. After careful thought, he had asked Shiomi to step in as a private tutor, teaching Rin the fundamentals. Their lessons were held about once a month. Shiomi had to admit. Rin, with her rare alignment of all 5 elemental affinities, was in many ways more gifted than Sakura. Perhaps it was a flicker of jealousy on Sakura's behalf that made him decide not to have her attend those lessons alongside Rin. Instead, Sakura's magecraft was entrusted entirely to Morgan. If the students were of similar potential, then the only way to make a difference was through the level of the teacher. In 3 months, Mr. Tokiomi will begin transferring the magic crest to his daughter, Shiomi continued. Rin will take over as the next head of the Tasaka family. It's already been reported to the Mages Association. From then on, Tokiomi would serve only as her father, handling the Tasaka family's affairs until Rin came of age. He could no longer guide her as a magus, but he didn't seem too discontent with the way things had turned out. Being alive, more than anything, was enough. The Mages Association. Waver murmured. Just a few days after the Holy Grail War ended, he had received the official war report as one of the surviving Magi. Tenkai Shiomi, now sitting before him, had killed Kaneth and his servant in direct combat. Don't look at me like that. The Holy Grail War is a fight to the death. Kaneth understood that perfectly, Shiomi said, raising an eyebrow. I know, Waver sighed. Ever since learning the truth, he'd felt a measure of guilt over Kaneth's death. If the King of Conquerors had been contracted to Kaneth instead of him, the outcome of the battle between his teacher and Shiomi might have been very different. So, Waver, aren't you heading back to England? Shiomi asked. You were technically skipping class at the clock tower to take part in the Holy Grail War, right? I'm planning to take a break from school, Waver replied casually. Then I want to travel. See more of the world. Learn about things I never even considered before. The world was vast. Filled with things he hadn't even begun to understand. Of course. Being around a king changes a person, Shiomi said with a knowing smile. Iris V. Il, listening nearby, let out a soft laugh. After the conversation, Iris V. Il went to rejoin her family, and together they headed toward Mama Town by car. Garrett Sugu Emiya had bought a house there and was currently renovating it. It looked like they were planning to settle down. Waver, meanwhile, made his way to the shopping mall in Shinto to pick up supplies for his upcoming journey. Done talking? Morgan came downstairs after making sure everyone else had left. She'd been upstairs having snacks with Sakura and Karin. She was still wearing the same blue kimono. Clearly fond of the outfit Shiomi had picked for her. All done. We can head to the park and see the cherry blossoms soon, Shiomi said, pointedly looking at Sakura as he spoke. Karin giggled behind her hand. Are you admiring the flowers on the trees or your sister over there? Dad. Sakura pouted, protesting loudly. Shiomi laughed and dodged playfully, then turned to Morgan with a more serious topic. I don't plan to stay in Fuiuki. Or Japan. Forever. In a couple of years, when Sakura and Karin are a bit older, I want to travel with them. Help them grow, see the world. He closed one eye thoughtfully. So I'll need to set you up with a false identity. Just in case. Something to keep people from asking questions. After all, as a high-ranking familiar and a legendary witch, Morgan would draw more than a little unwanted attention. What do you mean? We need to come up with an alias. If you have a name in mind, let me know. There's no rush. Morgan tapped her chin, thinking briefly. Actually, I've already decided. I'll take your family name. As for the given name. She looked at him with a tenderness so unexpected, it left Shiomi momentarily speechless. Let's go with Esk. Chapter 89, Land of Shadows Interlude, Life, 1, got you. Too slow. Using the smoke from the explosive magecraft to obscure vision, Denkai Shiomi seized the chance to slip behind his opponent and launch an attack. But before the spear in his hand could land, his opponent spun around even faster and knocked it aside. Shiomi tumbled several times across the hard, uneven stone ground, finally coming to a stop against a stone wall. Ugh! He lay there, drawing sharp breaths. That strike had hit squarely on his shoulder blade. For a moment, Shiomi thought the bone might have snapped. Even with healing runes, the pain was impossible to ignore. Seeing the tall, slender purple figure land in front of him, Shiomi instinctively reached out for the spear lying nearby, preparing to get back up and continue the fight. That's enough for today. Your body is already close to its limit. The purple-haired woman lightly flicked her toe, sending the spear flying into her hand. With that announcement, Shiomi finally exhaled, remaining sprawled on the ground, motionless. There was no way to tell time in this place. No clocks, no sun, only a perpetual cover of clouds. But based on how his body felt, Shiomi guessed the training had lasted nearly a full day. The sheer fatigue left his entire body sore. He simply lay there, waiting for the runes to work and ease the pain. You're improving. I just meant to test your limits, but you held up surprisingly well. The woman crouched beside him, speaking cheerfully. Was it really me holding up? Seems more like you're the one who refused to call it quits, master. Shiomi shut his eyes, refusing to look at that flawless face, not even a single hair out of place. This was the so-called Land of Shadows. And the one he called master was its guardian. Its queen. Skathak. Shiomi had long lost track of how long he'd been here. It felt like ages. Because he'd managed to survive in this land, Skathak deemed his potential worthy and took him as her disciple. He could have declined, of course. But she warned that if he did, she'd leave him out in the wild. Having had enough of battling the undead, Shiomi accepted without protest. Is that so? I'd say that was just a warm-up. For my disciple, handling that much should be expected, said Skathak. Right. Shiomi cracked one eye open. So, master, does that mean you were going easy on me today? He pressed the question. Training this brutal. Like a marathon where you coughed up blood. Was nothing new. But today hadn't felt quite as unbearable, even if he'd lost in the end. Oh? Didn't expect you to say that. Looks like I can push the next session even harder, Skathak replied, her smile laced with danger. Realizing there was no turning back now, Shiomi pushed himself up and leaned against the stone wall of the castle. Skathak casually sat beside him, matching his relaxed posture. But seriously, there's really nothing here, Shiomi said. No food, no water. I'm surprised I even managed to survive. Skathak smiled knowingly. Not entirely true. Unlike the outside world, the greater source here is still dense. As long as you have enough mana, you can survive. She extended her hand, and mana naturally gathered in her palm, nearly crystallizing. When you're tired, use mana to fight fatigue. When you're hungry, use mana to stave off hunger. When you're injured, use mana to heal yourself, Skathak said. You don't even need me to teach you that much. Shiomi grimaced, unsure how to respond. He had assumed Skathak had given him some kind of magecraft protection. But it seemed the truth was just the opposite. Just based on that, your aptitude in this area already makes you the most exceptional of all my disciples, said Skathak, who was merciless in training but never stingy with praise when it was due. Sitting cross-legged, Shiomi rested his hands on his ankles. If the mana here is enough to keep me alive, then wouldn't it be possible to use it to grow plants, maybe even get them to bear fruit? I told you already, this is the land of the dead, Skathak answered quietly. In other words, it's a realm akin to the underworld. The very concept of life barely exists here. At that, Shiomi almost asked, then what about you and me? Don't we count as living? But he swallowed the words before they left his mouth. Skathak, who had already become semi-divine, couldn't be considered a living being in the conventional sense. For her, death was no longer a possibility. Not a beautiful death, nor an ugly one. She simply continued to exist. Unchanging, eternal. Maybe only when the world and even what's beyond it comes to an end would she face something that could be called death. As for himself, don't worry about that. I'm just hard to kill, that's all. Xiaomi had asked Skaithak once, and that was the cryptic answer she gave. Knowing he wouldn't get anything else no matter how many times he asked, Xiaomi stopped trying. So, it's really impossible? He asked. Skaithak gave a relaxed smile. Why? Want to give it a try? I kinda do. Can you teach me, master? Xiaomi perked up. But Skaithak's next words were like a cold bucket of water over his head. That's something you'll have to figure out on your own. I've already taught you all I can about magecraft. Master. Xiaomi groaned. No need to force it. If you want to do it, go ahead. If not, forget it, Skaithak chuckled. Just don't slack off on your training. That made Xiaomi snap. He dusted himself off and jumped to his feet. Are you seriously implying I'm just trying to weasel out of training? Watching him struggle to keep his temper in check, yet failing to hide his irritation, Skaithak chose not to clarify the misunderstanding. Good. I hope you're not. You know the consequences of dodging training. Use anything in the castle as you like. And if you do manage to create something, I might consider easing your training load a bit. Xiaomi gave a silent nod and walked off without a word. Still seated by the stone wall, Skaithak picked up the training spear lying beside her and smiled quietly. At first, it was just a whim. A way to kill time. That made her take him in as a disciple. She thought he wouldn't last long, and she'd send him off when he broke. But he's turning out to be more than I expected. Chapter 90, Land of Shadows Interlude, Life, 2. Skaithak wasn't the type to talk tough but go easy. She meant every word. And followed through. Xiaomi had long since came to understand this. Just because he wanted to research using magecraft to make something grow in this dead land, he never expected Skaithak to ease up on the intensity of his training. If anything, maybe his recent progress had been too good. Because her training had only grown harsher since. She'd stopped distinguishing between magecraft and martial arts training, blending the two into increasingly brutal combat sessions. As expected, Xiaomi never once complained during practice. At most, he'd sigh about how exhausted he was once it was over. Then, after recovering a bit, he'd get right back to his magecraft experiments. Skaithak's castle was vast. Large enough to house an army of tens of thousands. The only issue, there were no supplies to speak of. Xiaomi had chosen a plot of land near the castle to experiment on, trying daily to use magecraft to create plants that could bear fruit. From then on, whenever Skaithak had nothing else to do, she found herself watching him work at this nearly hopeless endeavor as a kind of entertainment. Knowing full well that even if she tried to stop him, he'd never quit his research, she let him be. Failure after failure didn't dampen Xiaomi's resolve. Each time, he'd sit down, think things through, and apply the lessons to his next attempt. Failure number 137. Skaithak kept count silently. After exhausting every method he could think of, Xiaomi finally stopped on the 137th attempt. He looked worn out, sitting there in a daze. Thinking of giving up? As the sole observer of his efforts, Skaithak posed the question. No. I just feel like I'm stuck within the limits of conventional magecraft. If I could change my perspective a little, maybe. Xiaomi hunched forward, staring at the water-soaked earth. Maybe so, Skaithak said lightly. After all, what you're trying to do is akin to performing a miracle. A miracle. That's right. Magecraft itself is the embodiment of miracles, Skaithak nodded. I don't think I've ever taught you about this part. Consider this an impromptu bonus lesson. At that, Xiaomi turned quickly to face her. As the only student in the Land of Shadows, there were no formal teaching sessions. Lessons came during battles or casual chats. It all counted. Listen well. The miracles humans can perform fall into 4 broad categories: magecraft, rituals, mysteries, and curses. In other words, any miracle within the reach of human capability, no matter the form, ultimately belongs to one of these 4. Skaithak stood before him, one hand on her hip, exuding her usual composed authority as she continued. But above all that exists a higher tier. The authorities wielded by the gods. Authorities. Xiaomi echoed, unfamiliar but not entirely alien to the term. Skaithak gave a small smile. But that's a topic for another time. We won't go into it now. The unexpected reply made Xiaomi pause. He looked up at his master, studying her face. So you're saying, what I'm trying to do now is actually an attempt to recreate the divine act of creating life from nothing. He swallowed nervously, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. Who knows? Skaithak smiled again. Trying to grow a fruit tree in a lifeless land. And calling that the power of the gods? If that were all it took, the gods would be cheap indeed. With that, she turned to leave. But Xiaomi called after her. Then what about you, Master? You've taken countless lives. Human, undead, even divine. With that kind of power, surely you could. My, how bold you've become. You've even started mocking your own master now. Skathak glanced back, smiling with a hint of menace, like she might raise her spear any second and drag him into the next round of training. Shiomi remained seated, unmoving, and shook his head earnestly. No, Master. I didn't mean it that way. It was just a joke, Skathak replied with a nod. Yes, I've taken countless lives and possess immense power. But listen well, my disciple. She turned and walked slowly into the castle. Her voice echoed back from the shadows inside. No matter how powerful you are, you still might not be able to make a single flower bloom in a place where life is impossible. Shiomi instinctively reached up to touch his hair. Only then did he realize. It had never grown. It had stayed the same length all this time. With that thought, Denkai Shiomi stood up, turned to look at the land behind him, and fell into a long silence. After his next training session, Shiomi resumed his efforts in what could only be described as research into a taboo miracle. Skathak, as though she never tired of watching, observed this near-futile endeavor from her room's window, from atop the castle walls, or even from nearby. Wherever struck her fancy. Eventually, during a short nap in one of her breaks, Skathak suddenly sensed a massive surge of life force emerging from somewhere within the castle. She immediately rushed to the source. A sapling was pushing its way out of the earth, growing steadily. At that rate, Skathak figured it wouldn't be long before it stood taller than Shiomi himself, who was still channeling mana into it. Astonished that her disciple had finally achieved it, Skathak also caught wind of the underlying danger. Just as Shiomi turned, likely eager to share the good news with her, she struck from behind and knocked him unconscious. The sapling's growth gradually slowed, eventually stopping at just under twice a person's height. As she lifted Shiomi from the ground, Skathak let her hand brush against the trunk. To think you'd use your own body as nourishment to bring life into this world. Skathak's voice was a mix of exasperation and pride. But I'm sorry. I can't let you continue. The power of authorities is still far too vast for a human to bear. She glanced once more at the blossoms blooming on the branches. Apple blossoms. You've caught a fragment of that power. Now, killing you might be harder than killing me. She shook her head with a smile and walked away, carrying Shiomi in her arms. And this? She never told him, not even when he eventually left the Land of Shadows. Chapter 91, Prologue, Rains Al Meloi Archai Sort, 1. The year was 1999, 5 years after the Fourth Holy Grail War. London, Clock Tower. I heard you met Tuko? In the reception room of the Department of Creation, a woman in her 70s, her hands lined with wrinkles, held a teacup and posed the question to Tenkai Shiomi, seated across from her on the sofa. Not exactly, Shiomi replied with a nonchalant tone. Last year, he had visited Tokyo for some matter and briefly met with Tuko Ozaki. Whether the one he met was the real Tuko or a doll acting as her substitute was something even Shiomi couldn't confirm. In fact, as far back as the late 80s, Tuko had already sought Shiomi out. After all, parading around under the guise of being her disciple for so long was bound to draw the attention of the real person sooner or later. After a bit of friction, they became acquainted. Shiomi not only refused to take part in any missions to designate Tuko for sealing, but also used his position to pass information to her. Of course, Tuko was notoriously elusive. More often than not, she simply borrowed money from him. What, did she stand you up? The old woman asked. No, she just didn't give me the money I asked for. We went back and forth a bit, then parted ways. Shiomi rested his chin in his hand. And don't start lecturing me about dereliction of duty. I resigned from the sealing designation executor list a long time ago, Lord Valuala. The woman speaking with Shiomi was none other than Inurai Valuala Atraham, head of the Department of Creation at the Clock Tower, also referred to as the department chair. And the mentor of the aforementioned Tuko Ozaki. Despite being her teacher, Inurai was a quintessential magus. She had once trained Tuko, but also strongly endorsed her sealing designation. She never allowed personal feelings to interfere, executing political maneuvering as naturally as breathing. So when it came to Shiomi, she did what she could to court him, aiming to elevate him as one of the leading representatives of the democratic faction among Magi. He. Inurai chuckled lightly. Shiomi didn't care whether she believed him or not. The truth was, he had asked for money and hadn't gotten it. If anything, he'd only gotten himself entangled in further complications. Besides, Tuko had already left Tokyo. Even Shiomi didn't know where she had gone. So you called me here just to ask about Tuko? That's all I can tell you, Shiomi said with a shrug, though he didn't leave right away. Inurai would never summon someone without a deeper purpose. If she had invited Shiomi here, it meant there was more she wanted to ask. I hear your daughters are nearly junior high age? Inarai asked. The older one will start next year. The younger still has another year to go, Shiomi replied, seeing no reason to hide it. In recent years, Sakura had grown rapidly as a magus, and Shiomi had already begun discussing her future with her. Should she begin formal magecraft training at the clock tower next year, or continue her regular schooling and decide on the path of a magus later? With Sakura's current talent, even if she didn't join the Mages Association, she wouldn't be passively drawn into magecraft-related affairs just because of her potential. And just as expected, Sakura expressed her desire to delve deeper into the world of magi. Shiomi had no reason to stop her. No wonder I recently saw a file about a girl with the same surname as yours being sent to the clock tower, Inarai said with a soft chuckle. Her aged face deepened with more lines, making her look even more wrinkled. Yes, I was the one who sent it, Shiomi replied. The clock tower had no shortage of young students entering to study magecraft, so Sakura didn't particularly stand out. At most, only the more curious students might discover that she was adopted. Well then, that works out, Inarai suddenly said, though her meaning was unclear. Shiomi didn't press for an explanation. Then, almost as if it had been rehearsed, just as their brief exchange wrapped up, someone knocked on the door to the Lord's reception room. A blonde girl walked in, appearing about the same age as Karin. Her skin was porcelain smooth, and she moved with a graceful poise as she adjusted her skirt. But what stood out the most was the determined look in her fiery red eyes. She couldn't have been much older than 10, yet the resolve in her expression made it hard to imagine what she might have gone through in her short life. Her crimson eyes swept over Shiomi briefly, then shifted to a deep azure. Mystic eyes. Shiomi instantly understood. This girl possessed mystic eyes and had just used them to examine him. Trailing behind her was a tall man with long hair, towering more than half a head above her. Waver Velvet. Shiomi spoke his name, then corrected himself. No, I should call you Lord Elmeloitu now. It's been a few years. You've really changed. On the contrary, you haven't changed at all. Elmeloitu exchanged pleasantries with Shiomi, a faint smile breaking through his typically stern demeanor. 5 years ago, Shiomi looked only a few years older than Waver. Now, he appeared even younger than the current Elmeloitu. Of course, it might simply be that Elmeloitu had been overworking himself, aging prematurely as a result. A magus needs to know how to take care of themselves, Shiomi said with a light tone, then shifted his gaze to the young girl standing in front of Elmeloitu. And this must be. I'm Rain's Elmeloi Archie Sort, she said with a mischievous smile. Foster sister to Kenneth Elmeloi Archibald. The man you killed during the Fourth Holy Grail War. Puts things into perspective, doesn't it, Mr. Shiomi? Though technically, I'm his niece by blood. I see. Shiomi gave a small smile and glanced toward Inarai. So, Lord Valuala sold me out to the Elmeloi faction for revenge? Wouldn't fighting here be a bit inappropriate? Rain strolled over gracefully and sat beside Shiomi, acting like a child seeking attention from an adult. But the presence she carried was not to be underestimated. Of course not. If a fight broke out now, I'm afraid the Department of Creation and the Department of Modern Magecraft would be switching hands by tomorrow, Rain said, locking eyes with Shiomi. Besides, even before my brother entered the Holy Grail War, many within Elmeloi warned him that it would mean certain death. But he went anyway. And, just as predicted, was killed by you. Even if Elmeloi seeks revenge, it won't come so easily. Is that so? Then what brings you to me? Shiomi took a playful tone, treating Rains like a child. Young lady of the Elmeloi family? He reached out to pat her head. Rains didn't shy away, playing along like an innocent little girl. Chapter 92, Prologue, Rains Elmeloi Archie Sort, 2, Allow me to explain, Lord Elmeloitu said as he walked over and took a seat on a single armchair. Simply put, I'd like to invite you to become Rains's tutor. Huh? This time, it was Tenkai Shiomi who was left speechless. Whether it was Lord Elmeloitu or Rains, the current leaders of the Elmeloi faction truly operated in ways that defied common sense. To think they would ask the very magus who killed the previous head of their faction to tutor the heir. Someone expected to take control of the faction and eventually rise to the rank of lord at the clock tower. It was a decision that could only be described as magus-like. Ha ha ha. Rains burst into delighted laughter, as though this was a casual tutor interview rather than a serious meeting. It's perfectly reasonable for Mr. Shiomi to be surprised. But like I said earlier, I'm not interested in revenge. Honestly, I'm far more curious about the abilities of a magus capable of killing a genius like my brother. And Rains wasn't just putting on a front. Before setting out, the faction had been full of warnings about Kenneth's likely demise. But Kenneth never took Shiomi seriously. Not even as a potential threat. Even after seeing how Shiomi could spar with Diarmid without breaking a sweat, Kenneth only realized too late that those warnings were true. Instinctively, he moved to strike preemptively for his own survival, but after wounding Shiomi, he grew overconfident again. That constant underestimation eventually led to his death in their final confrontation. After the Holy Grail War, Shiomi drew significant attention for killing the monarch of the aristocratic faction. Of course, that didn't mean he was condemned for it. For a magus, life and death were part of daily life. Especially in a blood-soaked contest like the Holy Grail War, where 7 masters and their servants fought to the death for a single wish. Kenneth had gone into it with the mindset of playing a game. His death was practically inevitable. So Shiomi never faced any consequences. On the contrary, the outcome marked his pledge of loyalty to the democratic faction. Already on friendly terms with Inurai, Shiomi became a highly valued guest within the faction. As an unaffiliated magus capable of slaying Lord Denkai, Shiomi embodied the democratic faction's ideals and delivered a stinging slap to the pride of the aristocratic faction. Moreover, during the Holy Grail War, Shiomi had uncovered issues with the Greater Grail itself. Working alongside the Tasaka family, the Innsburn family, and the Holy Church, he helped purify it, preventing a catastrophe and laying the groundwork for future Holy Grail wars. Thanks to those 2 major contributions, Inurai, representing the democratic faction, had begun making plans to promote Shiomi to the rank of Grand. It was an unprecedented move. And naturally, the aristocratic faction was doing everything it could to block it. Even now, 5 years after the Fourth Holy Grail War, the 2 factions remained deadlocked. Meanwhile, Shiomi had started paying more attention to the state of the clock tower, both for his own sake and for his family's. After Kenneth's death, the Elmeloi faction collapsed. Outside forces swooped in to seize its assets, and many branch families disbanded after grabbing what they could. Only one person stepped forward. Solayui Nuadari Sophia Ri, Kenneth's former fiancée and one of the survivors of the Fourth Holy Grail War. She used her resources and partnered with Waver, who had returned to the clock tower on borrowed money, to purchase Kenneth's classroom and re-establish it under Waver's management. After many twists and turns, Rains, the one most compatible with the Elmeloi magic crest, became the successor. She pulled Waver into the faction to manage it and granted him the title of Lord Elmeloi. As for the 2, that was Waver's own addition. Whether or not Rains harbored any thoughts of revenge against Shiomi didn't really matter. From the Elmeloi faction's perspective, trying to get revenge on Tenkai Shiomi was far less practical than cutting their losses and moving on. After all, no one could say for sure that the democratic faction wouldn't one day elevate Shiomi to the rank of Grand or even make him the lord of a department. So when the proposal to promote Shiomi to a higher rank emerged, a rumor began to circulate: who knows how many heads from the aristocratic faction will roll once that guy becomes a lord. At this rate, the clock tower might soon be ruled entirely by the democratic faction. Although Shiomi would have liked to hold whoever spread that rumor accountable, the source was untraceable. He had no choice but to let it go. So that's why you arranged this meeting through Lady Inurai? Shiomi turned to her. Should I take this as a sign that Elmeloi is preparing to side with the democratic faction? Rains waved her hands dramatically. Not at all. If I really joined the democratic faction, I'd need more than one life to survive. But the negotiating with them and inviting a top-tier magus like you to be my tutor? That's nothing out of bounds. She paused, then glanced at Shiomi and Inurai with a shrewdness that didn't match her age. Of course, if I did become Mr. Tenkai Shiomi's student, then someday, if I led the Elmeloi faction to join the democratic side as your disciple, it would be much safer, wouldn't it? If the aristocratic faction ever tried to stir trouble again, Tenkai Shiomi would likely stand up in defense of his pupil and factional interests. In other words, this was a promissory note. A vague pledge to join the democratic faction, with no set deadline. Even so, the mere fact that they could propose such a condition was enough to get someone like Inurai, an experienced political player in the clock tower, to broker the relationship between Shiomi and Elmeloi. I've never officially taken on any disciples, Shiomi stated plainly once he understood the real purpose of the meeting. Aside from teaching my own children, I only occasionally give magecraft lessons to Rin Tasaka, head of the Tasaka family in Fuyuki. My teaching qualifications are still uncertain. But if you're fine with that, I don't intend to refuse. In truth, Inurai, Rains, and even Lord Elmeloi too had likely arranged this meeting knowing full well that Shiomi wouldn't turn them down. After all, the man had a family to support. He wasn't in a position to pass up a stable source of income. One last question, Shiomi added, does the young lady of the Sophia family have any objections? Rains chuckled non-stop. Don't worry. Lady Solayui absolutely doesn't want to see you. And you won't have to see her either. Well, that's even better. Shiomi nodded and shook Rains's hand, signaling the deal was sealed. Chapter 93 of July 2003. Even in midsummer, London stayed cool. The highest temperatures barely reached 25 degrees Celsius, and the daily average hovered around 15 degrees Celsius. Cool enough that one needed to bundle up at night. Still, in the courtyard of this elegant mansion on Sulla Street, the atmosphere was anything but chilly. Rains focused her magic into her fingertips, preparing to command her mystic code, Volume and Hydrargyrum, to strike the figure before her. But just as her well-prepared attack made contact with Shiomi, it lost its edge, slipping entirely from her control. With nothing more than a simple gesture, extending his index finger, Shiomi parried her assault using a subtle spell. Not bad. In that case. Emboldened by the exchange, Rains prepared for another strike, her flame-hued mystic eyes glowing with even more intensity. But the surge in power disrupted her control over her magic circuits. She winced, eyes clenched shut in pain, and reached into her pocket for the special eye drops she always kept on hand. Through her barely opened left eye, she caught sight of Shiomi approaching. He extended his finger once more, this time touching her forehead. A faint glow emanated from his fingertip. An energy like the gentle awakening of spring, quiet and restorative. It flowed into the nerves linked to her mystic eyes, dispelling the burning heat from the overload. Her mind cleared again. That's enough for today's practical lesson. Pushing further won't help you, Shiomi said, retracting his hand and walking to the edge of the courtyard. A table and tea set waited in the shade. He casually poured himself a cup. What a shame, ending so soon. Rains remarked with a trace of regret. But it was just for show. Rains Elmeloi Archie sort knew her limits. Even with the aid of her specially formulated eye drops, she was in no shape to continue channeling her magic circuits today. You're really something, though, teacher. Able to suppress my mystic eyes when they overheat. She sat across from Shiomi with a curious smile. The more I see, the more convinced I am that my brother made the right call in hiring you. Shiomi remained impassive. It's not particularly difficult. The issue is that during an overload, you can't spare the attention to manage it yourself. And Lord Elmeloi too isn't exactly suited to this kind of task. Moreover, Rains wasn't one to easily trust others. In a state of overload, the only one she would allow near enough to apply corrective magecraft was her tutor. Naturally, Shiomi had only earned that level of trust in the last 2 years. That move you used to stop Trema's attack just now. Is that the same one you used to kill my brother? As they transitioned from training to rest, Rains posed the question again. The Trema she referred to was her Mercury maid, formed by further rewriting her personality through Volume and Hydrargyrum. Her most prized mystic code. From the start, Rains had no grudge against Enkai Shiomi for killing Kaneth. As a child, she was just another overlooked member of the Archie Sword branch, never someone a prodigy like Kaneth would bother noticing. Their connection was purely one of blood. Over time, as their trust grew, Rains became genuinely curious about how exactly Shiomi had killed Kaneth. When Kaneth's body had been returned to the clock tower, the autopsy only reported that he died from a cursed blade piercing the heart. The curse had rendered Elmeloi's magic circuits useless, leaving no chance for recovery. But from 1999 to now, 4 years later, Rains had never once seen Shiomi wield a weapon. If anything, he resembled a textbook magus more than a combatant. And the official after-action reports from the Holy Grail War, shrouded by competing interests, remain vague and contradictory. No matter how many times Rains reviewed them, she couldn't piece together a clear picture of Kaneth's final moments. That was just a rune meant to disable weapons, Shiomi replied, silently counting in his head. The 26th time. Since becoming Rains's tutor, this was the 26th time she'd asked that question, and Shiomi still had no intention of revealing any real details. I figured. Rains had studied rune magecraft as well. Exceptionally gifted, she had already noticed that while they were using the same runes, the results from Shiomi's hands were on an entirely different level. There's no difference in the magecraft itself. The difference is the caster, Shiomi said, raising an eyebrow. You've never been in a real battle. You lack experience. Don't worry about it. Rain sighed. Another evasive answer. She had asked Elmeloi too before, but his replies were always along the lines of, that man is among the most exceptional magi. More importantly, Miss Rains, Shiomi said, I'd like to take a week off starting next week. His work as Rains's tutor was about as intense as being a lecturer at the clock tower, and the pay was generous. It was obvious Rains was serious about keeping top talent close. Oh? You want time off? Something going on at home? Rains asked curiously. She was already quite familiar with Shiomi's daughters. She hadn't yet decided if she should consider them friends, but the connection was growing. From what she knew, Sakura was only studying the basics of general and individual foundation classes, taking standard Magus course exams. Karin, on the other hand, had been recommended to attend El Meloitu's lectures. It was now July. The clock tower would soon begin its summer recess. Rains had assumed the break would start in August, so she didn't expect Shiomi, who rarely took leave except on formal holidays, to suddenly ask for a full week. Something like that, Shiomi said, setting down his teacup. I've got to go out with my wife for a bit. We won't be leaving the UK, so a week should do. Rains rested her chin on her hands and gave Shiomi a suspicious look. She knew Shiomi was married, but she had only seen his wife, Shiomi, 4 or 5 times over the years. Despite her clearly Western features, she had a Japanese name. It was mysterious on every level. It's nothing serious. El Meloitu needs to investigate something, Shiomi added. If you're curious, just ask him. Catching the unmistakable glimmer of curiosity in Rains's expression, Shiomi smoothly redirected her attention, and quietly made a mental note to send El Meloitu an apology later. Chapter 94. The next morning, Shiomi and Morgan departed from Paddington Station aboard a diesel train bound for Wales. As the train swayed gently and the countryside rolled past the window, Morgan glanced out, then said in a relaxed tone, "Taking me on a trip at this time of year. Are you finally feeling like the kids are getting in the way now that they're growing up?" "You know that's not it," Shiomi replied, lips pressed into a thin line as he sat back on the sofa in their first-class compartment, glancing over the report in his hands. "So, where are we actually headed?" Morgan hadn't asked for any details before they left. It had been more than 9 years since the Fourth Holy Grail War, and even she hadn't expected to linger in this era for so long. Still, it was her decision, and Morgan had no regrets. Her earlier jab had been nothing more than a passing joke. Shiomi clearly enjoyed traveling. Whenever a holiday rolled around, he'd take the whole family on trips. At first, they stayed within Japan, but once Sakura and Karin grew older, they began traveling abroad. Just a few months ago during the Easter break, he had taken Morgan and the children to Easter Island. Today's outing, though, didn't carry the usual air of a vacation or a honeymoon. "We're going to a place that's connected to you," Shiomi said. He paused. "Or rather, a place that should be connected to you." Morgan blinked, slightly surprised, then quietly nodded. Though he had never spoken of it directly, Shiomi's perceptiveness had long since picked up on Morgan's unusual nature. But this was the first time he'd ever said it out loud. With the situation now out in the open, Morgan relaxed and began to enjoy the journey. After 2 hours on the train, they arrived in Cardiff, the capital of Wales. From there, they transferred to a coach, watching bilingual signs in English and Welsh flash past the windows. 5 more hours passed before they began to ascend a mountain. The trail was brutally rough. So much so that even Morgan couldn't help but feel it had been designed solely to wear down human legs. "Tired?" Shiomi called out. He had gone ahead on a particularly steep incline and was now reaching back to help her up. "This path is rough, and the air up here is far from ideal. Want to switch to spirit form?" The sharp cries of birds echoed through the forest. The smell of damp earth, animal droppings, and rotting fruit mixed into a heady, wild scent that defined the mountains. Gripping Shiomi's hand, Morgan stepped up lightly. "What kind of question is that? Even if I'm relying on the mana from our contract to remain in this world, I'm still a servant," she said as she moved to walk beside him. "Actually, I should be asking you. Are your legs holding up, husband?" "More or less," Shiomi said with a chuckle. "The greater source is especially strong here. As long as I keep the mana flowing, I'll be fine." Still, the trail was so difficult that before they'd set out, Shiomi had warned her more than once. If she couldn't make the hike, he would go alone. As arranged with Lord El Meloitu, Shiomi was to reach the destination first, confirm there were no issues, and then wait in the village for El Meloi's arrival. Even so, Shiomi kept her hand in his. "I honestly thought Her Majesty would scoff at such a remote, rugged path." Morgan smiled without concern. "That all came later. Before that, I walked the entire island of Britannia. So, what do you think of it now?" "No strong opinions," Morgan said softly. "This world is simply how it should be, in this era." Though the greater source was indeed more concentrated here than in most parts of the world, it was still a realm that had long since declined from the age of gods. Fairies and other beings of fantasy had already retreated to the other side of the world. Now, this planet belonged wholly to humanity. In a way, Morgan's quiet reflection, that everything had become something else entirely, wasn't far from the truth. "Do you like it?" Shiomi asked with a smile. Morgan fell silent, thoughtful, before slowly replying, "Because it accepts my husband. Even if there are many things I don't care for, I suppose it's still a beautiful world." "What kind of answer is that?" Shiomi grumbled, but his hand tightened slightly. "No one gets rejected by the world. There are, Morgan said softly. When someone accomplishes certain things, the world, or even the foundation of human order itself, will reject them. The more you talk, the worse it sounds, Shiomi sighed. That's just how it is. You're a magus. You should know that better than anyone, Morgan said, looking at him. She wasn't wrong, but the idea of being rejected by the human order was far removed from Shiomi's reality. He was just another magus living in this world. While he belonged to the more esoteric tier of society, among other magi, his life was still relatively ordinary. Let's change the subject. I get the feeling we're almost there. Where exactly are we going this time? Morgan asked. The world of the dead, Shiomi said. Morgan's expression immediately darkened. You in a hurry to go back there or something? I wasn't talking about the land of shadows, Shiomi quickly clarified. Didn't I mention on the train that this place has something to do with the Witch of Britannia? Well, that's true, Morgan admitted, her brow easing. But what does this have to do with Lord El Meloy too? It's because of the Holy Grail War, Shiomi replied with a sigh. After the Grail was purified, the Mages Association and the Holy Church conducted a joint investigation. Since the Greater Grail had never fully activated and had only consumed a portion of its mana, it was determined that the ritual would automatically initiate again 10 years later. In 2004. Shiomi hadn't felt comfortable dismantling someone else's constructed ritual. And for various reasons, he had ultimately chosen purification over destruction. Still, the fact that the Holy Grail War was set to resume within 10 years left him unsettled. If he could help it, he didn't want to get involved again. You're already tied to the Holy Grail War. There's no avoiding it now, Morgan said, reading his unease clearly. Even if you try to stay away, there will always be something that drags you back to Fuiuki, to face the war again. You make it sound like it's already decided. Shiomi muttered. But inside, he couldn't bring himself to deny her words. Just then, the sound of wings flapping echoed through the brush along the trail, and a dozen blackbirds burst out from the forest canopy. Chapter 95, seeing this, Shiomi didn't hesitate. He pulled a neatly folded cloak from his backpack, draped it over Morgan's shoulders, raised the hood to cover most of her face, and gently fastened the cord at the front. The mountain air in midsummer wasn't particularly warm, and with the two of them using magecraft to ward off pests, there was no practical need to bundle up. Still, Shiomi did it anyway. Morgan didn't question him. She understood now why he'd insisted on carrying all the luggage himself. This was the man she had chosen. If he acted this way, he had his reasons. All she needed to do was wait, like watching a film unfold, ready for the next scene to reveal its truth. There really are a lot of crows around here, Morgan remarked with a soft laugh as Shiomi adjusted her cloak. Crows carry souls. A low voice echoed from the direction the birds had flown. A shadow emerged. A man in his 60s dressed in black. Though age showed on his face, his figure under the coat remained solid and sturdy. Unkempt hair poked out from beneath an old, worn traveler's hat. It's not just Britannia. In continental Celtic mythology, crows often appear too. They're guides of the dead, guardians of graves. Their cry says it all. Nevermore. A single black feather landed on his shoulder. From the sound of it, you must be the gravekeeper? Shiomi asked, stepping slightly in front of Morgan and turning to face him. What business does a magus from the clock tower have here? The man responded. He'd recognized Shiomi at a glance. Not only that he was a magus, but one from the clock tower. Clearly, this man wasn't ordinary. No urgent business. I'm just scouting ahead for Lord El Meloy too, Shiomi said calmly as he turned to fully face him. Also, a prophecy is close to fulfillment. I came here to deliver that message. Oh? The man's eyes flashed with surprise. Through the gap in her hood, Morgan saw the corner of Shiomi's lips curl into a smile. Or rather, the Black Madonna will soon arrive here, to give the Gravekeeper new guidance. Now that's a prophecy I've never heard before, the man said, still skeptical, though clearly no longer dismissive. Shiomi's words had struck at something hidden in the man's identity. I only came upon it by chance, Shiomi said with a warm nod. In that case, follow me. I'm the Gravekeeper. Brusque Blackmore. If you've come seeking me, then come along. With that, he turned and strode into the forest with surprising speed. Shiomi didn't hurry. He already knew the route. Sigh. Morgan let out a quiet breath. So that's what this place is. I didn't recognize it. Blackmore Cemetery. One of the most storied graveyards in the land, its name had long circulated among magi. That's why I kept it a surprise, Shiomi said, taking her hand again. This time, with deliberate elegance. Morgan's palm rested lightly in Shiomi's, lifted ever so slightly. As if to announce to anyone watching that she was the one of higher status, and he, merely an attendant. Well then, just to be sure, she said from beneath her hood, lips pressed together but unable to hide the smile creeping across her face. "This Black Madonna you mentioned wouldn't happen to be? Do you really have to ask?" Shiomi smiled. Finally, Morgan couldn't tolerate his smug theatrics any longer. With servant-level strength, she gave his hand a hard squeeze, the resulting sound sharp enough to intimidate. The Black Madonna mentioned by Bursk Blackmore was none other than Morgan Le Fay herself. Though, for the Morgan standing here now, that name wasn't entirely accurate anymore. "I didn't expect you to bring me to such a remote mountain village just to play ghost games." Morgan looked at Shiomi, who was starting to sweat but still kept a calm expression. "If you're not happy with it, you're free to head back. It'll cost us a bit of time, but I'll take you back to London and find another way here," Shiomi said, feeling a little guilty about dragging Morgan into this act. He had no intention of forcing her to play along. "Well, since we're already here, we might as well take a look." Morgan stepped forward. She had heard of Blackmore, but in all these years, she'd never set foot there and knew nothing about the place. Following the path Bursk had taken, the two arrived at the village nestled in the rugged mountains. The population was only around 100 people. So small it felt like it could vanish from history at any moment. Most of the buildings were made of brick and tile, clearly over 100 years old. Though the villagers wore modern clothing, if they were dressed in medieval garb instead, it wouldn't feel out of place at all. Bursk was already waiting at the village entrance. With him stood a man in clerical robes, so obese his triple chin made his face nearly round, and a young woman dressed like a nun. People from the Holy Church. Just one glance, and Shiomi and Morgan grasped the situation. According to Bursk, the man and woman were the priest and nun of the Northern Church, also tasked with managing the village's daily affairs. As outsiders, they needed the priest's permission to enter the village. The priest was named Fernando Cruz, and the nun was Illumia. Led by the priest, the nun, and the gravekeeper, the two newcomers made their way toward the church. "So, may I have your names?" Fernando asked, waddling forward as he wiped his sweat with a handkerchief. "I am Tenkai Shiomi, and this is my wife, Esk Shiomi," Shiomi introduced Morgan. Bursk glanced at Morgan, her face obscured by a hood. "Is your wife unwell?" "No, she just has sensitive skin. She's not used to the mountain climate," Shiomi answered smoothly. As a magus from the clock tower, Shiomi didn't attract further scrutiny from the Holy Church's local representatives. Bursk had already explained they were just the advance party. The actual guests would arrive the next day. Once they reached the church, the priest handed over the guest preparations to the nun and went off to receive the visiting faithful. But as the nun passed by Shiomi to attend to her tasks, she paused and whispered something that immediately caught Morgan's attention. It wasn't the closeness that bothered her. It was the message, cryptic and unexpected, and it didn't seem like a warning. "You'd better not stay here too long." Chapter 96. The church in the northern part of Blackmore village had a modest exterior, its walls covered with ivy. Inside, the chapel was simple and spacious, reminiscent of the one in Fuiuki. But its ceiling rose far higher. The interior was spotless, adorned with refined yet humble furnishings, exuding a quiet sense of solemnity and reverence. Shiomi could easily picture the place packed on Sundays, villagers filling every seat as they listened to the portly priest deliver mass. Bursk led them to the church, then left after reminding them to first offer a prayer to the Black Madonna statue at the front of the chapel. It was village custom. The old gravedigger even demonstrated the process for them. "I'll handle the prayer," Shiomi said, kneeling on one knee and clasping his hands before his chest. "In that case, wouldn't it be better to pray to me directly?" Morgan said flatly. "Rather than a statue, praying to the actual Black Madonna should be more effective." "Fair point," Shiomi chuckled. Even so, Morgan didn't follow through on her own suggestion. She simply stood behind Shiomi, observing the church while waiting for him to finish praying. There was nothing particularly unusual about this church, except for the statue of the Black Madonna, which was especially striking. The key was in the face. Statues and paintings of the Virgin Mary often vary slightly in different regions, but the face of this Black Madonna gave Morgan an uncanny chill. Her brows, her eyes, every feature closely resembled her own. Or more accurately, the face of Morgan Le Fay. Though she still didn't know why the Holy Church was overseeing this place, Morgan had a faint suspicion about why Shiomi had brought her here. This village might have deep ties to Morgan. As someone who resembled but was not quite the same person, she was left with a strange mix of emotions. "I've changed my mind," Morgan said suddenly. "You want to head back?" "I'll take you," Shiomi offered. "I need to finish up here for Lord El Meloy too, so I'll leave the house in your hands." "I'm not going back," Morgan raised her hand, cutting him off. "While we're in this village, don't call me by my real name. Not even in private." "Huh? Just like when you introduce me to others." Use a different name, Morgan insisted. She hadn't altered her appearance to match the identity tied to that name, but here of all places, she didn't want to use her current one. Names carry their own kind of mystery. Some even bring curses just by being spoken aloud. In a village so deeply entwined with Morgan, she couldn't help but tread more carefully than usual. I understand, Esk. Shiomi looked at Morgan. Esk nodded, accepting her request. Gazing at the face of the Black Madonna, Esk said, it's a rare opportunity. I knew the situation here, but I never imagined I'd visit something tied to that side in this form. If you don't find the trip boring, that's all I can ask. Shiomi stepped up to her and gently tugged the brim of her hood, tucking her face deep into the shadows. At that moment, the half-closed chapel door creaked open. A girl, also cloaked and hooded, timidly stepped inside. Are you the guests Mr. Bursk mentioned? She kept her head lowered, her voice soft and shy. That's us, Shiomi replied, turning to face her. She gave a small nod and murmured, Mr. Bursk has arranged a place for you to stay. Please follow me, if that's all right. Without waiting for their answer, she turned and quietly left the chapel. Startled by how wary this isolated village was of outsiders, Shiomi and Esk exchanged a smile before he took her hand and followed the girl at a relaxed pace. Perhaps realizing she was walking too fast, the girl slowed down, keeping just ahead of them. Even when she glanced back, the hood obscured her face entirely. Even her mouth was hidden. Mr. Bursk asked me to pass on a message. If you intend to stay in the village, you must follow the rules. Her voice stayed tense and nervous, as if she were scared of something. Maybe she was afraid of outsiders like Shiomi and Esk. Please, go ahead, Esk replied. At first, visitors must pay their respects to the statue of the Holy Mother upon entering. You've already done that. The girl nodded again and nervously added, Second, do not go out at night. Third, do not approach the cemetery alone. And lastly, even if you must go to the cemetery, never go alone. And definitely stay away from the swamp near it. The first rule sounded like a local custom, but the rest? More like something out of a horror story. Neither of them asked questions. They simply nodded in acknowledgement. The lodging she mentioned turned out to be a hunting cabin just outside the village. There was no inn or guest house in the village itself. Only that place was available. As if pushing herself to get it over with, the girl led them to the wooden cabin, didn't sit or say much, just gave a quick bow and hurried off without another word. Looking at the old bed and the musty, moldy-smelling blankets, Shiomi couldn't help but hesitate, wondering if it was really okay to let Esk sleep in such conditions. Say, Esk. Maybe you should just shift to spirit form. Shiomi tried to persuade her not to keep her physical form up. Since their new contract, she hadn't once turned into spirit form. Shiomi understood she was intentionally avoiding it, trying to put aside the fact that she'd arrived as his servant. But when he put down his bag and turned to speak, he saw Esk still staring at the girl's retreating figure. Something bothering you? He asked, stopping mid-sentence. Esk shut the door, then pulled back her hood, revealing a face deep in thought. I'm not sure. Maybe it's this place's connection to her. But just now, I felt that one's presence from that girl. That one? Shiomi raised an eyebrow. No. Maybe it's just my imagination. Esk lifted her cloak and sat down on the old but clean wooden stool. Still, I didn't expect to find someone here with a similar aura. From what I found, this village was founded as a gravekeeper's settlement because of her. Shiomi shook his head slightly, then spoke a name he hadn't said in almost 10 years, Artoria Pendragon. Chapter 97. Although they had left London in the morning, it still took nearly 10 hours of travel to reach Blackmore village in the Welsh mountains. By the time Shiomi got them settled into the hunter's cabin, dusk had already fallen. He lit the fireplace, and the damp chill that clung to the room slowly faded under the crackling warmth of the charcoal flames. There's only instant coffee and some sandwiches I made before we left, Shiomi said, handing Esk a cup of hot coffee. Tomorrow we'll probably have to look for food outside the village. Or head to the church and ask for something. Compared to life in London or Fuiuki, their current situation in this remote mountain village was unbearably rough. No need for that face. I'm not blaming or complaining, Esk said quietly, eating the sandwich from the box. I've lived through much harsher days than this. A few years of comfort haven't dulled my ability to adapt. Eh? Is it that obvious? Shiomi reached up and touched his face. It might as well be written on it. Esk blew on her coffee and took a small sip. After all, we didn't come here on holiday. You know why we're here. Shiomi nodded and asked seriously, are you really okay with this? Bringing trouble on yourself? It's not the worst kind of fun, Esk replied naturally. Life in this era is too comfortable. A little thrill reminds my husband that his wife is no ordinary woman. I've never forgotten that, all right? Shiomi shook his head. Esk smiled and shifted the topic. According to the Mages Association, the Fifth Holy Grail War is expected to restart in 6 months to a year, right? Yeah. But since I killed Kenneth in the last war, the Mages Association has been pretty shaken. Shiomi sat up straight, resting an arm on the table beside him. The clock tower had originally planned to keep the Holy Grail War under wraps. Most magus thought it was just some regional magic contest in a far-off corner of the East. Only a few knew it involved a so-called omnipotent wish-granting machine. As the former Lord Elmeloy, Kenneth had, of course, known it was a wish-granting machine. Before the Fourth Holy Grail War began, the relevant details were archived in the clock tower's library, but only those who deliberately sought them out would learn the full picture. Kenneth entered the war with partial knowledge. And died. That incident sent shockwaves through the Mages Association, prompting a re-evaluation of the Holy Grail War's significance. I have to say, the death of Kenneth Elmeloy Archibald wasn't exactly a loss for the clock tower. It allowed them to reassess the value of the Holy Grail War and increase the number of recommended participants from 1 to 2. Shiomi shrugged. The Mages Association is sending 2 magus to the Fifth Holy Grail War. A real moth-to-flame situation, Morgan muttered, shaking her head. One more slot didn't mean much. If anything, it just raised the stakes. Most of those competing would be from prominent magus families or newly rich upstarts. Who knows? Shiomi smiled faintly. He'd already decided he wouldn't return to Fuiuki with Esk and the children until after the Fifth Holy Grail War ended. Sakura hadn't gained anything especially useful from the Mages Association. She had inherited Esk's entire system of magecraft and was already showing real results. If she weren't deliberately hiding her true ability, Sakura would have been promoted to the rank of Pride long ago, just like Shiomi. Of course, like him, Sakura's real capabilities went far beyond that. Even so, she remained a low-key genius within the clock tower. In every respect, she far outshone her older sister, Rin Tasaka. Also, I heard from Rains that the Lord of the Department of Astromancy, Mar Isberi Animosphere, has already secured one of the spots. Shiomi looked thoughtful. I wonder who'll get the last one. He knew Lord Elmeloy too was planning to participate in the Fifth Holy Grail War, but Rains clearly didn't want it to come to that. She was doing everything she could to keep him at the clock tower. After all, Kenneth had borrowed money to purchase a magical energy reactor for the Holy Grail War, and although he died in battle, the loss only affected the Elmeloy faction. The magecraft crest was passed down to Rains, and most of the debt had been paid off over the past 9 years. 4 years ago, Tu had invited Shiomi to be Rains's tutor. Now, as long as he could secure Elmeloy's position as lord, he could finally step away. Let's set that aside for now. I've got some bad news you should probably hear, Esk said. It was rare for him to hesitate so much. Even if it's only a faint sign at this point. Shiomi blinked. What is it? Sakura seems to be planning to participate in the Fifth Holy Grail War. Esk's calm words hit Shiomi like a bomb. What? He didn't quite process it at first. But there was no need for Esk to repeat herself. In the Holy Grail War, aside from the original 3 families, anyone with a strong enough desire to participate would be chosen. Including the 2 slots given to the Mages Association this time, there were still 2 vacancies left. Generally, only magus with a strong will to enter would be selected by the Greater Grail system and granted a command spell, which required them to go to Fuiuki in person. A typical example was Lord Elmeloy II, formerly Waver Velvet. Owning a holy relic increased the likelihood of being chosen. Of course, magus from the clock tower could travel to Fuiuki on their own, but that would bring serious political complications, making it an undesirable choice. If Sakura returned to Fuiuki, her exceptional magecraft and strong intent to participate would be more than enough to get her selected. Shiomi covered his mouth, lost in deep thought. He didn't want Sakura stepping into that deadly conflict. But he also didn't want to force her against her will. She had grown up doing as she pleased. She seemed obedient, but she was actually very strong-willed. If you really don't want to deal with it yourself, I could talk to her and try to convince her to give up, Esk offered. Let's wait until I get back to talk this through, Shiomi sighed. For now, we have more immediate concerns. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Shiomi instinctively said, "Come in." The girl who had led them earlier cautiously pushed the door open. "Sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Bursk asked me to bring you." As she spoke, she caught sight of Esk's face and dropped everything she was carrying with a loud clatter. Chapter 98, Here, have something warm to drink and relax. Shiomi pulled out a spare cup from his bag and poured the girl a cup of coffee. Her name was Gray, one of the villagers. But her identity was far more complicated than that. Flustered by her earlier blunder at the door, Gray hurried to help pick things up and neatly stack them in a corner. Only after that did Shiomi persuade her to sit and rest with a cup of coffee. After a brief self-introduction, Gray took the cup he offered, head lowered, while sneaking glances at Esk. The reason was obvious. Now that her hood was down, Gray's face looked almost identical to Esk's. That resemblance alone disrupted Shiomi's already troubled thoughts. For a fleeting moment, some strange ideas even crossed his mind. Unfortunately, before he could say anything, Esk silenced him with a jolt of electric magecraft. More accurately, Gray didn't just resemble Esk. Her appearance was exactly like Artoria Pendragon. "Is that your original face?" Esk asked. Caught peeking, Gray flinched and nearly spilled her coffee. "And no. I started looking like this about 9 years ago," she said, clearly upset. "One winter day, my face suddenly began to change. And eventually settled into this. 9 years ago. That was during the Fourth Holy Grail War in 1994. In that context, her face turning into a mirror image of Artoria's made perfect sense. Let me take a closer look." Esk's interest was piqued. She handed her coffee to Shiomi, walked over to Gray, and gently touched her forehead with a fingertip. "Eh?" Gray blinked in confusion. She was overwhelmed. She hadn't expected to meet someone in this remote village who looked so much like her. When this woman had arrived, she too had worn a cloak and kept her face hidden beneath a hood. Their matching appearance and attire sparked an instinctive sense of kinship in Gray when she saw Esk's face. Could this woman have gone through the same thing she had? Esk's palm lit up. The light surrounded Gray, but she didn't feel anything unusual, so she quietly waited. She remembered Bursk mentioning that these visitors were magus from outside. Maybe they could lift the curse that had befallen her. "I see." Esk withdrew her hand as the light faded. "So they've been cultivating potential heirs just to wield the Holy Lance." "Holy Lance?" Shiomi raised an eyebrow. "You mean Wrong Ominiad? One of the noble phantasms said to be wielded by King Arthur." Wrong Ominiad. Esk had explained once that its true nature was a tower, bridging the surface of the world and what lies beyond. And among the 4 branches of her magecraft, tower was the one derived from her mastery of that Holy Lance. He. "Lucky you, Gray." A sharp, slightly grating voice suddenly rang out, echoing through the hunter's cabin. Shiomi looked up. Gray's face turned awkward. She fumbled under her cloak and pulled out a cylindrical, lantern-like cage. Inside was a cube-shaped mystic code. On the side facing them were what looked like eyes and a mouth. The mystic code's eyes were locked directly on Esk. "And no. Didn't I tell you to stay quiet, Ad?" "Seriously." Gray sounded exasperated, but her tone was more like someone scolding a close friend for breaking a promise. "Ad? A nickname for the Holy Lance?" Shiomi wondered silently. Only after voicing her complaint did Gray realize something was off. In the village, she was the only one who could hear Ad's voice. But just now, she'd instinctively assumed everyone else could hear it too. Was it because of how Mr. Shiomi reacted? Or was it because this woman, like her, bore the face of the king? Oh? Now that's an interesting design. Esk casually took the cage from Gray's hands, lifted Ad up, and met his eyes directly. After a few seconds, she let out a quiet sigh. The core uses a different technique, but the external processing, that's something else entirely. She set the cage down on the table and snapped her fingers lightly in front of it. Ad began to tremble, then quickly settled down again. "So, care to chat for a bit?" Esk asked, her tone light and a little teasing. Ad responded. It was the same voice, yet deeper now. Calmer, more mature. "I don't think there's anything to discuss. Since you've returned to this village in person, are you here to complete the final ritual yourself?" he asked. "That's not certain," Esk replied coolly. "You've misunderstood the Kaladi from the beginning. In fact, I might do the exact opposite. As a constructed persona created by this side. No, more accurately, as the seal of the Holy Lance. Would you resist what I intend to do?" Ad fell silent. Even this brief exchange left Gray feeling overwhelmed. She couldn't make sense of Ad's sudden shift in tone, or how this woman seemed to understand everything about the village without hesitation. "Do as you wish." With that, Ad fell into hibernation. "That's it?" Shiomi scratched his head. He'd expected some kind of dramatic confrontation, but that was all? "Best not to get your hopes up too much, my husband." Esk returned to her seat by the bed. "It's only because the seal was partially created by the same person that I'm able to handle it so easily." Shiomi simply smiled and shrugged, tacitly approving of her actions. Will Ad be okay?" Gray asked anxiously. "Don't worry. He'll be fine." Esk's tone was gentle, tinged with sympathy. "In a way, your situation is partly my responsibility too." She turned to look at Shiomi. "Seems this trip may turn out to be more meaningful than I'd expected. I'm just here to help someone scout the area. And watch his back while he's on the move," Shiomi said with a casual wave. "If you've got something planned, go ahead and do it. I'll be right behind you, backing you up." He then turned to Gray. But your friend wasn't wrong, Gray. Shiomi gestured toward Esk with a slight nod. Her coming here might just be the luckiest thing that's happened to you. Chapter 99. The accommodations in the hunter's cabin were far from ideal. Even after cleansing the place with pest-repelling magecraft, the worn-out futons still didn't offer any real comfort. In the end, Shiomi wrapped himself in a blanket and leaned against the headboard, while Esk, also wrapped in a blanket, slept curled up in his arms. Esk had initially brushed it off as nothing worth worrying about, but once Shiomi suggested the arrangement, she went along with it without resistance. After managing to get through the night, the two greeted their second morning in Blackmore Village. The skies were clear and bright, a stark contrast to the gloom of the previous day. Bathed in midsummer sunlight, the hillside village didn't look nearly as desolate. After breakfast, Shiomi and Esk took a stroll through the village. Gray had informed them of the village rules. Approaching the cemetery alone was prohibited. But since they were going together, the restriction didn't apply. They left from the hunter's cabin, walking along a small path on the edge of the village until they reached the cemetery, which lay further north than the church at the village's edge. Just as I thought. Shiomi muttered, enhancing his vision with mana as he looked over the cemetery. What do you see? Esk asked. You don't see it? Shiomi let out a tired sigh and slumped his shoulders. While he didn't possess mystic eyes, he had learned a great deal in the land of shadows, and seeing spirits was just one of many minor skills he picked up. And Esk, being a servant, stood at the pinnacle of spiritual existence. Within that realm, she should be able to perceive spirits even without any special techniques. Just one look should have been enough to notice the spirits drifting through the graveyard. I really can't see anything. Esk, still holding Shiomi's hand, slipped her other hand from beneath her cloak and gracefully adjusted the front of it. Most of her face remained hidden in shadow, and it was true that the hood might be slightly blocking her view. Well. Shiomi pinched the bridge of his nose, mildly annoyed with himself. The spirits here. How should I put it? They feel both dense and thin at the same time. The mana in this area is thick, and it's natural for lingering thoughts to remain in the cemetery. But each spirit's outline is so faint that it's nearly impossible to distinguish them from the mana flowing around. He glanced around the cemetery and shook his head. It's a shame I'm not a necromancer. I could have translated their sorrow into words. But what really stands out is the direction they're all pointing. The whole cemetery felt like one massive undead entity. Was it connected somehow to Artoria Pendragon? As that thought crossed his mind, Shiomi suddenly noticed a few nearly imperceptible strands of mana drifting through the haze formed by spirits and magic. That must be it, Esk said with a quiet chuckle. Someone's interfering with the spirits from the outside. And because the villagers don't know a thing about magecraft, there's no attempt to hide it. She slowly raised her hand and pointed toward the southeast side of the village, where an old windmill cottage stood atop a small hill. No words were needed. They both understood immediately. Leaving the cemetery behind, they made their way toward the windmill hill. As they neared, Shiomi released Esk's hand and stepped ahead, motioning for her to slow her pace. The structure looked weathered and abandoned, and despite the wind whipping around the hilltop, the windmill's blades didn't move an inch. But Shiomi could tell. Someone had been using it. Even without visible signs of activity, nothing escaped his notice. Please, come in on your own. I should have greeted you at the door, but the sunlight today is unusually strong. Rather troublesome for someone with my constitution. A composed, dignified voice drifted from within the windmill house. Along with a magically compressed sound, a subtle fluctuation of magical energy reached their ears. What do you think? Could be a trap, right? Esk joked cheerfully, showing no sign of caution. Shiomi reached out and grasped the door handle. Well, since they've extended the invitation, we might as well take a look. Though he was someone who usually advocated for a peaceful life, Shiomi never backed down from danger. Esk often teased that he had adventurer's soul, just too stubborn to admit it. Remembering that now, Shiomi couldn't help but chuckle to himself as he opened the door. Inside was neat and orderly. The space was lined with screens that looked like they were carved from crystal, though there wasn't a keyboard or mouse in sight. While most magus from the clock tower held disdain for modern science, Shiomi was one of the few exceptions. He didn't mind it at all, and was quite well versed in the field. That said, there was a particular faction within the Mages Association that did extensively use modern, tech-like mystic codes. Often mocked as moles who buried themselves underground to do research, they were none less a force to be reckoned with. What an unexpected setting. For the Lord of the Department of Creation and one of the few servants who exist independently outside the Holy Grail ward to visit my workshop. How curious. Golden hair cut through the dimness of the room as a man stepped into view. Though the floor creaked unpleasantly with every step, his movements were silent. Cat-like. He wore a long cloak and kept his eyes closed. He looked around Shiomi's age, but in truth, he was likely far older. Well, this is awkward. I don't recall having such close ties with Lord Valuala, Shiomi said, resting one hand on his hip. Esk, who had shut the door behind them, removed her hood and revealed her face. Oh my! What a surprise! The famed Witch of Britannia herself. The man gave a courteous bow to Morgan. It is truly an honor to receive the both of you here. His manners were impeccable. He came across like a refined nobleman. But Shiomi knew better than to be fooled by appearances. The Mages Association was divided into three main branches. The first was the Clock Tower, the most well-known and populous, often synonymous with the association itself. This reputation was also due to the obscurity surrounding the other two. The second was the Wandering Sea, which upheld the ancient magecraft of the Age of Gods. The third was the group to which the man before them belonged. Atlas, a faction that studied ancient alchemy, distinct from Western magecraft and often branded heretical. Aren't you going to introduce your acquaintance? Esk asked Shiomi. Shiomi gave a helpless smile. I'm not influential enough to be personally familiar with Mr. Zipaya Ildnamatlasia, one of the three directors of the Mages Association. The man before them, Zipaya Ildnamatlasia, was the current head of the Atlas Institute, one of the Mages Association's three great branches. Chapter 100, Familiarity is a matter of perspective. Maybe if we spend more time together, things will naturally become more comfortable. Zipaya ignored Esk, directing his attention entirely to Shiomi. He wasn't a magus from the Wandering Sea, and his regard for Age of Gods magi extended only to a basic level of respect, nothing more. Yet the Tenkai Shiomi standing before him was someone who had genuinely caught Zipaya's interest. Though Shiomi remained unaware of it. So, what brings you here, Director Zipaya? Shiomi asked. Just gathering some data, Zipaya replied. I'll be staying around for a while. Shiomi nodded and didn't press for details. It was Esk who spoke next. So the director of the Atlas Institute is actually a dead apostle. I've been one for quite a long time. Zipaya didn't deny it, nor did he have any reason to. He looked at Shiomi. Would you two like some wine? I heard you're scouting ahead for Lord El Meloy too. It's better to gather enough intel before your companions arrive, right? Shiomi hadn't kept his journey a secret, but neither had he announced it openly. That left only one explanation. Zipaya had been monitoring his movements all along. Thanks for the consideration. Shiomi didn't decline. He simply narrowed his eyes and replied. Zipaya led them into a room inside the cabin. Though the room looked hastily assembled from wooden planks, not a single draft slipped through. Inside were elegant furnishings, and bottles of wine floated up under the influence of magecraft, pouring red wine into the neatly placed glasses on the table. As the rising star of the clock tower, I hope you won't mind my excessive interest, Zipaya continued. I just happened to notice a unique presence like yours in the Holy Grail War data from Fuiuki. Oh? Shiomi was tempted to ask who had put him up to it, but he knew the question wouldn't yield an answer, so he let it drop. He picked up his glass and took a light sip. Compared to 9 years ago during the Holy Grail War, Shiomi could handle his alcohol much better now. At the very least, he no longer needed to use mana just to stay clear-headed after a drink. What do you think of Blackmore Village? Zipaya asked. Though his eyes remained closed the entire time, Shiomi could feel his focus locked onto him. Only in this moment did Zipaya's tone subtly shift toward Esk. Utterly dull, Esk said coolly. Artoria died, just as expected. Yet now they want to bring her back. It's a contradiction I can't accept. Zipaya chuckled. You say that like it has nothing to do with you. And maybe it doesn't. Or shouldn't. But in the end, it's all inevitably tied to your ladyship, the Witch Queen, isn't it? From his words, it was clear Zipaya had a grasp on Esk's background and identity. That all-knowing attitude left Shiomi feeling slightly uneasy. Still, there was little he could do. While the Atlas Institute was part of the Mages Association like the Clock Tower, their perspective operated on such a different axis it might as well be another dimension. They viewed every possible future from beyond the boundaries of the world's development. It wasn't a matter of superiority or inferiority. The starting points were simply different. From their isolated vantage point, they'd watched the direction of the universe unfold for centuries, all while enduring the desire to leap from that height and end it all. Even for the director of the Atlas Institute, it was a grueling burden to bear. Living too long really isn't such a good thing, Shiomi said with a sigh. Esk shook her head. Who knows? The opposite is often true. You always end up able to endure far more than you'd expect. Yeah. Shiomi gave a bitter smile. Zipaya sat down across from them. Back to the matter of Blackmore Village. Judging from your ladyship's attitude just now, it seems you two have other plans? Does that matter to you? Shiomi crossed his legs and looked at the man in front of him. In a way, yes, very much so. Zipaya's eyes opened just a crack, a calculating smile on his face. After all, Reviving King Arthur is one of the contracts issued by the Atlas Institute. Shiomi's heart sank. The Atlas Institute, which had existed since before the Common Era, had issued 7 contracts over the last 2,000 years. This was one of the few things even the clock tower knew about. Reportedly, as of 3 years ago. By the year 2000, the Atlas Institute had already recovered 4 of the contracts. It now seemed that completing the recovery of all 7 contracts was the goal driving the Institute's current operations. Shiomi hadn't expected reviving King Arthur to be one of those contracts. He glanced toward Esk. But Esk had already raised a hand to cover her face. She looked like she couldn't bear to watch. Just how twisted was this version of Margan? On one hand, she sent most of the Knights of the Round Table to Artoria's side, ultimately toppling her rule and burying her for good. Yet on the other hand, after Artoria's death, she began scheming to bring King Arthur back. Going so far as to secure a contract with the Atlas Institute for assistance. It was absurd. For once, Esk felt genuinely uncomfortable. Logos react, Zepia said, naming the term. It's one of the 7 weapons lent out by the Atlas Institute, used to extract King Arthur's spirit. Interference with the ritual is strictly forbidden. Then he fell silent, saying nothing more. Got it. We'll be careful not to damage your equipment, Shiomi sighed deeply. He had already guessed the purpose behind Zepia's generous hospitality and loose tongue. But something like this isn't nearly enough to get a contract out of the Atlas Institute. Zepia chuckled. Our contracts are exceedingly rare. It's been a long time since we issued one. But if things go smoothly this time, I might owe you a favor. You could ask me to do something minor. Then I want you to never mention having seen Esk here, Shiomi said quietly. Not to anyone. Not even to the person who helped you obtain the Fuiuki Holy Grail War data. Once we leave Blackmoor Village, forget everything about us. Zepia's smile faded, leaving behind only a seemingly gentle expression. He gave a deep nod, accepting the request. Chapter 101, Zepia shared a bit more information about the village and assured them he wouldn't interfere with their activities in Blackmoor. With that, the two left the Windmill Cottage. Never expected even the director of the Atlas Institute to show up. This village really isn't simple, Shiomi said, standing on the hillside overlooking the valley below. From the windmill's vantage point, he had a clear view of the cemetery and the swampy terrain beyond. That area sat higher than the graveyard, making it hard to see from ground level. But I didn't think you'd only ask for something like that in the end, Esk said, adjusting the edge of her hood as she pulled it back over her head. Shiomi crossed his arms. Come on, at least try to recognize your own value. Most Clock Tower Magi claim servants are just familiars, but they're all secretly dying to study their mysteries. Especially someone like you. If the Clock Tower doesn't want to research you themselves, they'll just sell your information to the Wandering Sea. In other words, only the Atlas Institute, with its focus on alchemy and its primary goal of retrieving the 7 ancient contracts issued over the past 2,000 years, had little interest in someone like Esk. Even so, Shiomi had decided to secure her secrecy by making Zepia owe him a favor. Ensuring he would stay silent about her continued existence after the Holy Grail War. After all, if things escalated to a fight with the director of the Atlas Institute just to keep her identity hidden, it wouldn't stop at Blackmoor Village, population under 100. The fallout would be far worse. Definitely not in Shiomi's best interest. Better to reach a quiet, mutual understanding. Cautious as ever. That's so you, Esk murmured with rare praise. Clear on the little things, never missing the big ones. Shiomi held Esk's hand as they walked slowly down the hill and soon ran into Gray, who had come looking for them. Mr. Belsack asked me to show you around the village, Gray said. She wasn't wearing her hood this time, and her demeanor seemed subtly changed now that she was facing the two of them. Esk pulled her hand from Shiomi's and extended it toward Gray. Thank you kindly. The road's a bit rough, so I'll trouble you to hold my hand, Gray. Her voice was composed, regal. Even through the cloak, Gray was quietly captivated by Esk's presence. Just like Shiomi had earlier, she offered her hand to Morgan without hesitation. Sorry, I need to head over to the church. I can't join the tour, Shiomi said to Esk. Gray, I'll leave her in your care for now. All right, go on, Esk said with a slight tilt of her chin. Their eyes met briefly in the shadows beneath her hood. Shiomi nodded and turned toward the church on the village's northern edge. In truth, he drew much more attention than Esk did. She looked like a cloaked, conservative woman, but his clearly Eastern features stood out starkly from the local villagers. Every time he passed someone on the roadside, he could feel their curious stares. But Shiomi had anticipated that and made a point of acting completely natural, heading straight toward the church without doing anything suspicious. The villagers assumed he was affiliated with the church and didn't give him a second thought. Church layouts rarely varied much. He slipped through a side door near the end of the chapel, walked a few steps into the corridor, and was promptly stopped by a voice calling out to him. "I didn't expect you to still be here," a woman's voice called from behind. Although they'd only exchanged a brief greeting yesterday, Shiomi recognized the voice immediately. "Are you talking to me alone?" He turned with a smile. "Or do you mean the others too, Executor?" Sister Illumia's expression shifted at once. The mild displeasure on her face was quickly replaced by a sharp glint of killing intent. "Of course I mean the woman with you," she said. "But to recognize I'm an executor. You're clearly not an ordinary magus." "Naturally. For various reasons, I've had to work with executors from the Holy Church as part of my duties with the Mages Association," Shiomi replied, watching her closely. "People like you, who've mastered mysteries beyond just the sacrament of baptism rite, can be recognized from a mile away." Illumia's face slowly returned to neutral, like a mask of polished stone. Her right hand slipped from the sleeve of her habit, fingers pinching the hilts of several black keys. "I've heard of you. The Eastern Magus from the Association. All right, no need to glare like that." Shiomi lightened his tone, signaling that he had no hostile intentions. "And certainly wasn't a spy sent to probe the church. Actually, this could be a perfect opportunity for us to work together. Question is, do you have the authority to respond to what's coming?" "What?" Illumia narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "Don't judge me just because I'm a magus. I'm quite familiar with how the church operates," Shiomi said as he slowly stepped closer. "The church aims to stamp out dangerous beliefs before they take root. And here, the devotion to the Black Madonna and King Arthur is far more intense than anywhere else." Her sleeve fluttered as she quickly pulled her hand back, letting go of the black keys. Because Shiomi had hit the exact nerve. To the church, King Arthur was undeniably a heresy. The reason people believed Arthur was aligned with the church was that his legend had become so deeply entangled with local faith. While much of the Arthurian mythos was indeed shaped by church doctrine, the figures that filled those tales, court magicians, witches, and royal heirs, were inextricably bound to native beliefs. "So what is it you're planning to do here, Magus?" "Something that's in the church's best interest, of course." Shiomi held out the finger. "Even executors, with your unshakable faith. Surely you're tired of this endless surveillance assignment? As someone who stands at the top of those permitted to practice the church's secret rites, I imagine it wears on you." He spoke deliberately, every word aimed to persuade. Because it was the nun, not the bloated priest, who truly held power here. That man was merely her subordinate. Especially now, after that girl in the village underwent a transformation. The long-dormant faith of the past 1,000 years is stirring again. If you don't act fast to suppress it quietly, this will spiral into something the church can't easily walk away from. Illumia responded with a practiced, formal smile. "Then let's hear what you came here to do, Magus." Chapter 102. Although they called it a village tour, Esk had already visited the church and the cemetery. Even the Windmill Village, a place the locals rarely went to, had only been glimpsed by Gray when she saw Esk and her husband walking down from the hill. So, with nothing else to show, the young girl could only lead her esteemed guest on a casual stroll through the village. As they walked, Esk noticed something. Gray was particularly respected by the villagers, though not universally so. Still, many of those they passed gave confused or even displeased looks when they saw Gray supporting Esk. Their expressions seemed to say, "How could a mere outsider let our noble girl act like a servant?" Though unspoken, the sentiment was easy to read. The village's faith in King Arthur was deeply rooted. And with a face so similar to that of Artoria, Gray was naturally seen as a divine child. An object of reverence. Of course, 1,000 years had worn away much of that devotion, until it rekindled 9 years ago. No one could have predicted that a Holy Grail War ritual, happening far off in Japan, would trigger changes in a girl from a remote English village, causing her body to begin resembling King Arthur's. In other words, she and her kin had, for generations, been raised as vessels for Artoria's return. Among them, Gray's aptitude ranked among the highest. That was why the moment King Arthur manifested, she responded physically to the resonance. At the thought, Esk couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret. After retrieving Avalon, the ever-distant utopia, Artoria had made her choice. With a heart set on protecting the world, and a touch of unwillingness, she gave up on saving Britannia. She accepted death. And went to Avalon. This meant Artoria would no longer answer the call of the Holy Grail War. That was what Esk regretted most. Otherwise, she would have gladly recorded every detail of this village with Magecraft, and presented it to Artoria the next time they met. Just to unsettle her a little. Still, heroic spirit summoning wasn't limited to the Holy Grail War. The thought gave Esk an idea. "By the way, may I ask you something?" "May I ask you something?" Gray, who had been explaining the rather unremarkable sights of the village, finally tried to initiate conversation. But when she did, she didn't know how to address Esk. "Just call me lady. I came here with my husband, after all," Esk said gently. "What did you want to ask?" "I'm just a little curious. Why did you both came to this village?" Gray asked. "No real reason. We arrived here just looking to do a bit of sightseeing," Esk replied, her eyes drifting toward the village roads. "But after seeing you, I found something I might want to do." "Eh? Me?" Gray gasped. She was full of curiosity about Esk. Her resemblance to the king, her deep understanding of Ad's secrets. All in all, Esk was a woman shrouded in mystery. Something about her presence reminded Gray of the Black Madonna enshrined in the village church. Whenever she spoke with Esk, it felt like facing the Madonna herself. Even though Gray knew nothing about the Black Madonna at all. Rather than that, have you ever been outside the village? Esk shifted the topic, turning her attention to Gray's circumstances. Outside the village? You mean? Gray asked. Other places. Like the nearby towns or cities, Esk clarified. Gray shook her head. Not even once. Then, almost as if trying to make up for it, she added quickly, but sometimes we get traveling libraries or merchants with full carts of goods. I look forward to their visits every time. Libraries? So you like books? Esk sounded a little surprised. Yes. I love classical literature, especially detective novels. The girl lit up for a moment, only to fall quiet again as if a candle had just been snuffed out. Sorry. I got carried away talking about myself. No need to apologize. You were only answering my question, Esk shook her head. You're a lot like me. I've always loved reading. Then and now. Really? What kind of books do you like, lady? It was rare for Gray to feel so naturally at ease with someone, so she couldn't help but try to prolong the conversation a little. But the moment was broken by someone else. Ah, there you are. A gentle-looking woman in her early 30s approached them and greeted Gray. She wasn't particularly striking, draped in a light shawl, with a soft, calm expression that naturally put people at ease. Mother, Gray responded. So, this is the guest who came to visit the village? The woman looked at Esk, whose face was partially hidden under a hood, and then at Gray, who was supporting her, without showing any particular reaction. She introduced herself to Esk. My name is Magdalena. She was indeed Gray's mother, but Esk noticed that Magdalena hadn't mentioned that in her introduction. Esk replied simply. After observing Esk quietly for a few seconds, Magdalena suddenly made an unexpected offer that even surprised Gray. If you don't mind, would you like to come to our house? There's not much to see in the village. But if you're willing, please come in and have some coffee, take a break. Is that all right? Gray asked. Of course. Your guest is the village's guest. We should treat her properly, Magdalena said with a gentle smile. But the tone she used didn't sound much like a mother speaking to her daughter.